what is our particular take on Vishnu Tattva, what is the nature of God. The same thing we'll then do to the Atma, to the Jeeva. Is it a loving relationship? Is it a subordinate relationship? Is it this, that, and the other?
Doesn't merge. Jiva doesn't disappear. He says very clear at that on satsangs. And then he'll be in a certain mood where he'll just say, but tell me what isn't God?
We don't worship Shiva as supreme or Devi as supreme, but we worship them with an intention that they may purify us.
Essentially manifestations of specific Shaktis of Bhagavan, specific qualities, Visheshan almost of Bhagavan.
We have become too fixated with the idea that Rupa means fixated borders.
They'll point to the Bhagavatam, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, and they'll say, what is your refutation of that? What is your position on that? So let me make that position clear. Our conception of self is not that we messed up. Like we out of stupidity came down here because we're stupid and devoid of knowledge, or because we are somehow lacking any love for God inside of us. No, it's all in there, and we have the conviction that it's in there.
I'm attached to nothing. Then I said to Guruji, are you attached to the Atma? And he said, oh yes. Oh yes.
We do see him as Swarup Avatar. We do see Guruji as the Lord enacting the Leela of Guru, just as Chaitanya was the Lord enacting the role of a devotee. We do see it that way. Jai Gurudev Mayuran, Jai Gurudev Rishi Sahadev Ananda.
Jai Gurudev.
So this is the third of our three-part series on our new Siddhanta, on Tādātmya Vedānta. So as you guys know, we did our first two episodes, the first one on the Sampradaya model, the Sampradaya landscape, and sort of gave our take on that. The second was our presentation of Tādātmya Vedānta, sort of nailing the main principles in our philosophy, the main sections, I would say, of this book. And today we want to sort of complete that circle, which is we're going to address the tattvas. So that means what is our particular take on Vishnu Tattva, on Śrī Hari, what is the nature of God, various incarnations, forms, nuances. The same thing we'll then do to the Atma, to the Jeeva, and then to the Guru, Satguru. And we'll touch upon some other topics here and there, just again, trying to tie up loose ends and sort of connect all the dots so that we've covered, to a large extent, the major topics found within this book. Naturally, as I said at the very beginning of this three-part series, this is a book that's going to be coming out in a few months' time. This is going to go through an internal teaching process. We have to teach our various representatives, teachers, educators, etc. And then it will be available for public consumption. So this is something that, as I said, it's going to be digested gradually. Watch these episodes. You can rewatch them because they're so dense in a sense, right? And again, eventually the book will come out. So without further ado, I want to introduce today's topic a little bit, set the tone. Tattva is, I mentioned this in the second episode, that there's almost two domains of truth. That there is the objective world of almost facts, even in spirituality, which is tattva, principles. And then there are very true and real experiences to be had, so anubhava. We use the terms Tadatmya Sambandha and Tadatmya Anubhava, describing in a sense the nature of the relationship on a factual level, on an empirical level almost, between the various facets of reality, and on the other level, the qualitative relationship between those factors. When I say that I am a Shakti of Bhagavan, it does not explain, for example, the nature of the relationship that me as a Shakti have with Bhagavan as the Shakti Brit, the holder of the Shakti. So there is still room for expanding it into, is it a loving relationship? Is it a subordinate relationship? Is it this, that, and the other? And like that, we have these two different domains. One establishes principle, the other one makes it qualitative in a sense, right? So today we're talking about the tattvas, and so it is a little bit more towards the principles. It's about defining things, making them clear. But as you will see as we progress through them, there will always be a hint of how does that translate into our lived reality in Bhakti Marga, in the Haribhakta Sampradaya. So what consequence does this foundational principle, this let's say compositional belief, create for us experientially in our lived tradition, practically? How does Guruji bring that to us, and what impact does it have in us? And so because of that, I think one of the focuses that we want to bring to the table in today's episode is we want to quote a little more of Guru Vakya. We want to speak about what does Guruji actually say on a lot of these topics. For the first two episodes, there was a focus on historicity almost, the quoting acharyas, quoting śāstra, giving some historical context and references to justify certain positions or to explain distinctions between certain positions. There'll be some of that today, but I think the main focus is also bringing what Guruji's unique perspective is to the table, because the the Hari Bhakti Sampradaya Siddhanta is really a marriage of the two, as we laid out in the first episode, that any Sampradaya is actually a marriage in the sense of the Guru Vakya and the Veda Vakya, right? The word is of Shastra and the word of the Guru. So today, I think we just want to focus a little bit more on that. Okay, so that's it. Without further ado, let's get into this. Same way we started the second episode. Why is Vedanta important? Why is it important to define the tattvas, Mayuran?
Well, I would say a tattva, first of all, it's undeniable that there are different things in this world in reality. And so if you don't have tattvas, you're just in denial of reality. Now, in a sense, that is a kind of what Shankaracharya, in his philosophy, denial is a strong word, obviously, but he creates tattvas, but then says at the ultimate level, there is just Brahman, right? And the danger for us Vaishnavas, if we're specifically declaring a Beda situation, is that if you do not properly have categories and have tattvas and principles of this nature, you can quickly descend into chaos, no clarity, or just Advaita Vedanta in some way. You just slip into it's all one, it's all God, there's no distinction, there's just love, and so on. These points are true at a certain level, from a certain perspective, but without the clear definition of tattvas, you are just going to make a mess of the whole thing and you won't get the clarity. So first thing is accepting reality. There's obviously matter. There is, which isn't conscious. There is obviously living beings, which are conscious. And then if we turn to the Guru, Guruji, if we turn to the Shastra, we see that there is an overarching, ultimate, supreme person, truth. And so that is another tattva. So tattva is that which binds the intrinsic essence of something, of different things. It seeks to home in on the intrinsic essence and then bind it in a certain category, and then you have a tattva. So in Vedanta, we have Ishvara, Chit, the Lord, the conscious beings, and matter. And as I said, if you don't have those clear boundaries, you can slip into Advaita. Now, the clear thing about our Siddhanta and Vaishnava Siddhanta in general is these are eternal realities. Bhagavad Gita chapter 13, these are eternal realities. The Lord is eternal, Maya is eternal, Prakriti is eternal, and the Jiva is eternal. And so immediately, what this does is stop the descent into Advaita Vedanta. So that red line we were talking about in the previous episode, that doesn't get crossed because eternal fixed realities. But also it allows dynamic relationship. If the Jiva Tattva never gets obliterated and Ishvara, the Lord, is always eternal, obviously never gets obliterated, there's always going to be a dynamic relation between the two. So just at a very fundamental level, that's the key thing. In our Siddhantas, I would describe our Siddhanta as a hybrid Siddhanta. And what I mean by that is we have fixed tattvas, exactly as I described, 3 eternal tattvas, distinct, but at the same time, Tādātmya Vedānta.
Yeah.
Right? Whereby you have Prakriti at the other end of the spectrum, Bhagavan at the other end of the spectrum, and the Jiva in the middle, and Shiva, Devi, as we said before, closer. And this is taken from Guruji, when he was speaking to us often about the Siddhanta, when we went on walks with him, Vishnu Purana as well, this idea of a spectrum. So it's a hybrid situation depending on how you want to look at it. So that I think that's how it works.
I think just to piggyback off that last point, I think the categories are very clear, as you said, and I think experientially the categories can sometimes be blurred. Not obliterated, but blurred. And the reason I say that is because a lot of semantics gets involved in this. On the one level, we can always say that Jiva is a completely separate category from Vishnu Tattva and Jiva Tattva. However, from another angle, you'll say, but the Jiva is nothing but Vishnu's higher nature, as said in Bhagavad Gita. And so semantically, you can both say the Jiva Tattva is a part of Vishnu Tattva. At the same time, when you're being philosophically accurate, you'll say, no. These are very clear distinctions.
I mean, sometimes when we talk to Guruji and we say, he will say, the Jiva never, doesn't merge, the Jiva doesn't disappear. He says very clear at that on satsangs. And then he'll be in a certain mood where he'll just say, but tell me what isn't God?
That's it.
Everything's God. Everything is the Supreme Lord.
What is not Narayana?
What is not Narayana?
What is not Śrī Hari? Yeah.
And so that's again Tādātmya Vāli and also the clear categories of Tattva, and that's how Guruji expresses himself.
Just different angles, different ways to approach this. But this is why I think something like this is important, because it sets the contextualizing information. No doubt that these categories are not being obliterated, therefore become comfortable hearing these kind of statements.
Yes.
Because otherwise the alarm bells start ringing. You hear a statement like that, what is not God? And you go, whoa, Advaita creeping in.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just not that at all. It's just being contextualized as being everything is a part of him. Yeah. Okay, good. I think that one of the other things I think I would like to emphasize of also the need of the importance of classifying tattvas. You see, sometimes when you gain knowledge of tattva and you become very rigid in that, it can become problematic to your behavioral patterns, to your behavioral conduct. The reason I say this is as follows. When you understand the hard line, the hard wall between Shiva and Vishnu, for example. Say, oh no, one is Vishnu Tattva, one is Shiva Tattva, different Tattva. Behaviorally, that may make you into a sort of like Vishnu exclusivist that says Shiva's on a lower platform, therefore I have no interest in associating with him, or I will denigrate him to some degree. In my praise of Vishnu, I will also to some extent lower Shiva in my words, actions, behaviors. So one of the things that I think is very important to point out as well, and for people to listen to everything we're about to say, because when you explain tattvas, you have to inevitably explain hierarchies. This is closer to Bhagavan than this. This is higher than this. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Bhakti Yoga, higher than Karma Yoga, right? All of these hierarchies and comparisons come into the equation. But behaviorally, this is not meant to inform conduct of an aspiring devotee, but rather a framework, an organization of thought, an organization of positioning. It's so that you, in a sense, position yourself properly in life. And then there's a whole set of other principles that should guide your behaviors, such as, what is your purushartha? If your purushartha is a loving relationship with God, next question is, what does God want to see in me? Qualities. What are the kind of behaviors that are conducive to a relationship with God? And then you'll find things like humility. And out of humility, you will never speak words that denigrate someone like Shiva. You'll never say things like, oh, Shiva's on a very low platform, or Shiva's not, interesting to me. You see what I'm saying? And so I just want to make that point clear, because I think otherwise people take these statements too much to heart, and it's more like you should take these statements to mind and take other statements to heart.
But I think this is a good point. I mean, Sahadev, what would you say is how we practice, say, Shivaratri or Navaratri in relation to maybe other Vaishnava traditions?
I mean, these, we will later address them in more detail. We consider them Visheshana Murtis. But the way we approach them is obviously not as the supreme tattva. We don't worship Shiva as supreme or Devi as supreme, but we worship them with an intention that they may purify us, that they may help us to grow in our devotion to Śrī Hari. Even the Bhagavatam says, Vaishnavanam yatha Shambhuhu. So he's the greatest amongst the Vaishnavas, just as the Ganga is the greatest amongst rivers. The Shiva is an exalted Vaishnava, and by their blessing, we can progress. And sometimes, sometimes this is observed in the Vaishnava tradition, and this example is given that, for instance, if a wife is married to a husband, she would not even look at another husband, right? Because she has given, she has entered this marriage. I mean, today's it's a bit different, but in very orthodox, traditional Vedic marriage, there was a strong commitment, right? And just like when we enter this path of devotion to Śrī Hari, obviously we dedicate our life to him ultimately, but it's not that we don't profit from the great elevated beings that can help us on this journey, because Shiva, Devi, they are in constant union with the Lord, and they want to grace others with that same realization.
Do you know what it is? Forgive me. We talked about it in the last episode about Ananya Bhakti. So this idea that exclusive Bhakti is part of our definition of Bhakti, and I think a lot of Vaishnava movements, they embody that. They also believe in that. They have that towards Vishnu Tattva, towards Śrī Hari, and then therefore, out of this Ananya Bhakti, they're kind of like, I'm not even going to look over at Shiva. I'm not even going to do these things. what you just said, they would agree with. They say, yeah, he's great Vaishnava, his blessings can for sure help, but they won't go looking for those blessings. They're not actively pursuing them with full enthusiasm. It's almost like with caution always.
But I liked his example of the marriage, when it's kind of like, am I flirting or going or straying in some way from my husband?
You're right, but I look at it slightly differently. If you see Shiva, for example, as a marriage counselor, right, then the person you're married to will not get offended that you're seeking help to improve your marriage to that person, in a sense. Maybe it's a poor analogy, but I think the premise here is the way we live something like a Shivaratri. It's full. It's full on. It's not like a hesitant Shivaratri.
And I've seen, Vaishnavas from other traditions come and to Navaratri, to Shivaratri, and they are like, whoa, these guys are like, I mean, you could be mistaken for saying, are these guys Shaivites?
Yeah. For a day, almost.
Exclusive, and then, or Navarata, these guys Shaktas, right? They're just
for 9 days, almost.
For 9 days. I mean, everyone has a blast and it's amazing. Guruji's in tremendous mood, dancing. Shivaratri is extremely intense. Lingam Abhishekams all the time. But Guruji's not giving out, he's giving out vibhuti, the ash of Shiva and so on. It's, if you were a Shaiva, you would feel totally at home in our Vaishnava temple during Shivaratri, or if you're Shakta during Navaratri, you feel like, wow, this is like being in Tarapit or something like that.
Yeah. I think the comparison I would make, and I think it's a really nice, actually, it's one of the things I love most about what we do. Imagine in an Orthodox Vaishnava community, suddenly like one of the most exalted saints, Narada Muni, would just appear, right, and be there with him. They would all be like, in big celebration. They would definitely, he's worshipable, right? Devotees are worshipable. This is common Vaishnava understanding that devotees are worshipable. They would all be celebrating him, singing his glories and praises and whatever else. And I just feel like we fully embody that without any hesitation or restriction. Devi, the servant of Bhagavan, Shiva, highest Vaishnava, and we just say, these are the most exalted of sadhus, the most exalted of devotees, the most exalted of associates. Why on earth should there be caution, hesitancy, like respectful distance almost? Like, we give respect, no problem, but
we know what the reason would be is insecurity, right? When you're not clear, when you're nervous about straying, when you have become, let's say, overly dogmatic, you have this constant fear of almost a paranoia of this is bona fide, this is not bona fide, this is authoritative, this is not authoritative, or what is the aparad, the offense if I commit this, and so on. I mean, I was speaking to like I say, a Śrī Vaishnava. He's a very liberal Śrī Vaishnava. I mean, I wouldn't even say he's liberal. I think he's probably just orthodox, just a tremendously great, sweethearted guy.
Right.
And he came here to the ashram, and we were talking about this dogma and so on, narrow mind. And he said to me, there are some Śrī Vaishnavas that he knows that if they even utter the word Shiva, they take archamanyam.
to purify
themselves. They take water and chant a mantra.
Even when they chant Vishnu Sahasranam? Because it's actually a name also.
Right,
it's a name of Vishnu.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe that's a loophole. I don't know. But I mean, look, that's obviously a very extreme example. But it gives you an insight that can you go to a Vaishnava temple and sing a Shiva bhajan and feel comfortable?
Yeah.
I think you can go to any Bhakti Marga temple, and unless it's Krishna Jamashtami and the curtain's about to open and it's midnight,
Hara Hara Mahadev.
Yeah, it's probably not the best thing. But otherwise, you could come to any Bhakti Marga temple, sing a Devi bhajan, Shiva bhajan, darshan, whatever it is. Guruji would be very happy with that.
Yeah, it's true. I had a conversation once with a disciple of Satyanarayana Das Babaji. We were on a bus together, and sort of passed the time, we started talking about philosophy. And at one point I mentioned something like almost matter of fact. I said, because of course, Shiva can also grant realization. He can help you with attaining realization, bhakti, everything. And the disciple almost looked at me like, what? And I was like, well, isn't he the greatest Vaishnava? And the person said, well, yes. And I said, well, surely you can give what you have. What you don't have, you can't give. I accept, but if you have something, you can give it. If he's the greatest Vaishnava, and we talk about in all the Śāstra that the Lord is surrendered to his devotees, that he has given himself up fully to his devotees, his heart belongs to his devotees. You have the story of...
Sadhavo hriyamayam sadhanam hriyam tam. I'm in the hearts of my devotees in my hearts,
Then surely Shiva possesses the heart of the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And he can give it freely if he so deems it, correct to give, etc. And the person just sort of... I remember so clearly, took a step back, there was a silence, reflecting, yeah, that makes sense. But what I remember thinking is, wait, you never thought about this? Like, you never realized that, like, your primary scripture is literally telling you he's the greatest Vaishnava, and you never thought to think, how should I relate to him then? What can I, what is possible here? And this is why I think, like, look, take something like from Bhagavad Gita where he says only to worship Krishna, don't worship other devas, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I think sometimes that principle is taken too far. And I think the issue with that principle is that is meant as who is the primary object of your worship? Who have you given your heart to? I'm not advocating the giving of the heart to Shiva or the giving of the heart to Devi, for example, but rather that they are, it almost feels offensive to say this, helpers on our road to Bhagavan, but that's factually what they're willing to do for you.
But let's look at the Tādātmya Vedānta. On the spectrum, they are close to Bhagavan. They should be celebrated. That's the thing. It's even like, okay, regardless of whether I need their mercy, which I obviously do, but like, I just want to celebrate them. They are, and that's what, I think that's the attitude, in my opinion, from when I was observing Guruji, is he just celebrates them. This is Narayana, an extension of Narayana, and I want to celebrate him also in this form as Devi, as Shiva, and so on. I think that's another way of looking at it.
Okay, well, anyway, we've kind of jumped the gun on Shiva and Devi. I think we're gonna touch upon them again later in a slightly more technical way.
Can I make one point about tattvas? Yeah, very quickly.
Please.
I went to the reason why tattvas are important. Jeeva Tattva is eternal, the Lord is eternal. Is at one time I went to let's say a meditational organization, and we were invited to do kirtan there, and they were doing this meditation, and they were talking about love. They did this guided meditation. Can you feel the love? Go within. Can you feel love? Love, talking incessantly about love, and it suddenly struck me. It was an Advaita model, let's say, of where their meditation tradition comes from. And you see in them the difference between the Vaishnava idea of love, which is dynamic relationship, two-way relationship, as Guruji says, and versus just a principle of love. And because their tattvas are not purely defined and fixed and eternal, the principle of love, which is just, I would say, a kind of elevated happiness, is kind of how they describe it. But the way Guruji describes it, Bhagavatam and so on, Gopi relationship, whatever it is, it's dynamic, two-way relationship. The Vakari saints, that happens because we have the tattvas, right? And we're clear about that. It evokes a different kind of mood. I don't know, what do you think about that?
The question is, when we speak about love, who is the beloved?
Yes.
No?
Yeah.
And it's true that sometimes in these Advaitic traditions, they speak about love, but sometimes what I get from it is more like a sense of compassion to all.
Yeah.
Right. But then ultimately, if you really drill it down, if you really search for who's the beloved, there's not really, they could not give you an answer, because if there's ultimately only one tattva, then who's loving whom?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And this is what I'm saying. You get that dynamic relationship feel is very different in terms of how we understand love.
Yeah, well, relationship is foundational to the definition of love for us. And so it's like, if it's not relational love, almost there's a question mark of what even is it. We may term it as ananda. It's just bliss. You're experiencing sort of self-bliss, the bliss of the self.
Yeah.
But love is a, as you say, a dynamic thing, an exchange.
And then we talked about the definition of love and how it, destroys suffering, but evokes seva.
Yeah.
Right? It compels you to say, if there's no other tattva apart from your, one tattva, let's say, where's the service?
Yeah.
There's no compulsion for service.
Well, because for us, I think love is not just a state, it's also actions. It's also like a verb of sorts. It's a doing.
Seva is the compulsion to express the glory of God. And that's the very meaning of life. When Krishna in chapter 11 Bhagavad Gita, he says, I've done everything already to Arjuna. I've done everything already. I've killed all your enemies. But what does he tell Arjuna to do? Pick up your bow and fight nonetheless. Why? Because seva, the very meaning of life, is to glorify him, right? And that's the thing, that you get that with the tattvas. Yeah.
No, I agree. When you have these clear lines, it facilitates these kind of relationships. Okay, let's move into Vishnu Tattva. Let's tackle sort of the most important one first. Again, as I said at the very beginning, it's very important to bring a marriage between Shastra and Guruji's words for this topic specifically, I would say. For us, we categorize God as being a person, obviously, being a personal movement, and we're not impersonalists. The name we give to this at the highest level, in a sense of just an attribution, is Śrī Hari, right? Because Śrī Hari is, in a sense, the most neutral. Because the minute you invoke Narayana, for example, the Sri Vaishnavas are immediately like, that's our guy, right? And the way it's almost seen is immediately invokes also the image of, you know, Shriman Narayana, Adishesh.
Like a Ranganath.
This kind of, exactly, yeah. Padmanabha Swami, maybe, something like that.
Aha.
And so I think, and then, you know, obviously Shri Krishna in other sampradayas. And so just to sort of, before I go into all that, we have Śrī Hari as this, let's say, foundational, that is who God is statement. Who is God? Śrī Hari. How is God perceived? In what forms does God come? How can he be accessed? That's what we're going to expand on, and there's different answers to that. But there's something that is, I would say, perhaps unique to our sampradaya that Guruji brings to the table, which is the following. He says that God is ultimately inconceivable. And I want to sort of unpack this word, because inconceivable and conceivable at the same time. And so the way to understand that is that there is an inconceivable nature of God and there is a conceivable nature of God, and one is not higher or lower. It's not hierarchically arranged. So I'm going to read a couple of texts. One is a Vishnu Puran verse, and then qualify that with an excerpt from Guruji's writings, so that we can unpack what we mean when we say inconceivable. It stems from a question that we asked ourselves. As we were, you know, sort of discussing this section of the book, the question arose, well, who is God if we strip away these attributions like Bhagavan, Paramatma, Parabrahman? Because these are descriptions of functions almost. They're not actually, who is he? What is his name? What is his form?
What is an observer perceiving him?
Right. And then the question came, which is almost like an abstract philosophical question. Who is God when no one's looking? Right? And you may think this is a question that is a mental abstraction of sorts. It doesn't have any foundation in reality, because factually, whenever we speak of God, whenever we try to gain a perception of said answer to that question, immediately perception is there. So the answer is almost irrelevant.
And you could say he's always with his Shaktis, with his devotees and so on. And so therefore, does it really exist? Like, you know.
So this is a hypothetical, clearly. Yet, I found it an incredibly compelling and deep hypothetical, because as much as he's always with the Shaktis and it's relational, we also speak of God as being the only independent being, that he is supreme, he is the original cause. And so the question arises, who is God when no one's looking, in a sense? Like, what is God prior to transformations, prior to
Isn't it a wonderful
avatāras?
meditation? Like, just imagine the Lord, he's alone. He's alone.
There's something to it.
There's no one around. Who is he?
Yeah.
Who exactly is he when he's alone? You know?
And I'm comfortable with that being rather mystical, in a sense that we don't know the answer, and that's why we're invoking this inconceivable idea, that at that level, at that original, in a sense, untouched level, unperceived, whatever,
in full immensity,
it is inconceivable to some extent. And I think that there's I want to build a case for it, right?
Yeah.
So in the Vishnu Puran, in section 6, chapter 5, verses 66 to 68, there's a series of descriptions made about Śrī Hari. And I want to focus on exactly one passage that says, "The wise ones indeed perceive that which is unmanifest, ageless, inconceivable, unborn and imperishable, indescribable and formless, yet endowed with hands, feet, and so forth." So just to pick out a few words here. So that which is inconceivable, that which is indescribable, and then he presents the paradox of is both formless and at the same time has hands, feet, and so forth, right? I now marry that to Guruji's statement. So Guruji writes the following in his commentary of Srimad Bhagavatam on Canto 1, Chapter 3, verse 1. He says, "Earlier I mentioned that he, the Supreme Lord, has a cosmic form which is neither with form nor formless. How can you imagine something with form and at the same time formless? Difficult, isn't it? Yet that is the Lord himself," right? This sort of paradoxical presentation, it hints at two things that are fundamental to, I think, our sampradaya. One, that we're very comfortable with not having to describe everything to the last minute detail. In the second episode, we touched upon that when we discussed Vaikuntha, because we talked about Bhuvaikuntha, we talked about Paramapada, sort of the transcendent Vaikuntha. And we said that as much as that there are statements that describe Vaikuntha in Śāstra, as much as there are, let's say, inferences that we can make about Vaikuntha and the experience therein, we're also very much aware that it is a transcendent state beyond time and space. And our minds, our language, our perception, our references are all within time and space. And so we have approximations, we have equivalences, we have sort of ideas and descriptions that can serve as reflections of the state that may be experienced there. But we're all very comfortable in accepting that we can't actually describe what's going on there. The Vaikuntha is somehow an undescribable realm. The activities therein cannot be described. And that is not a source of any kind of discomfort for us. It's actually pointing towards the true nature of Vaikuntha as a transcendent space that has no reference in this world, in a sense.
It's
right?
also a glorification in a sense, because if you
I
say
agree.
it's so great, we cannot speak about it. Because as soon as we bring in words into the equation, with words automatically there's a limitation, because arguably all our words always refer to certain objects of this world.
But then how would you distinguish that from Shankaracharya's description of Brahman?
That it can't be described, yeah.
So what's the difference here? Like,
the difference here is that it's a supreme reality, which is a fullness,
right?
And whereas with Shankara, it's often you cannot say anything about it because it doesn't have any descriptors. It doesn't have any qualities.
I would actually make I agree with you, but there's another distinction I would make to why it's not the same as well. I'm saying we don't have the faculties here to describe what I believe to be variated and beautiful and all sorts of things. It's a limitation of the reality we're in and the references we have. But once you're in this Vaikuntha, it's not a homogeneous thing in the sense that Shankara presents as Brahman.
Okay, that's
being.
one clear.
Yeah, because Brahman of Shankara is homogeneous. It's one entity, right, with no distinction. I'm talking about Vaikuntha is going to be diverse. Multiple chambers in Vaikuntha, different experiences, different personalities, etc. It's dynamic. It's relational. All of these things. But we don't have the faculties, in a sense, to describe it, to define it, to perceive it from our
And I
tool
think
set.
did I say this yesterday in the lecture? I talked about serving. What Guruji said about serving.
Yeah, in the lecture we gave to the public. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it wasn't on the podcast.
No.
I'm getting confused.
It's all getting blurry.
Yeah. So. We were serving Guruji in Mauritius, and we were talking about service in the supreme realm of Vaikuntha, and he was basically saying there is no comparative barometer of how you do service here in Vaikuntha. Service here, he was saying, is it begins, it has an end, it has a context, it has an action. There is an aim, you achieve the aim, it's done, and you move on to the next thing sequentially. Yeah. And that is not the seva that goes on in the supreme realm. Seva is much more fundamental. It's like I said, it's a constant natural expression of the mahima of God that goes on. So we can speak about Paramapada, right? We can speak about that supreme realm, but we can't, but the decorative descriptions that we see in Shastra, we take that as meditational rather than literal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to almost invoke an Abeda situation here for God as well, that God is both, Śrī Hari is both conceivable and inconceivable simultaneously at the same time. And so at this cosmic level, almost at this universal level, and we don't mean Vishwarupa by that, this sort of like with form and without form cannot be sort of captured by our mind. That is the inconceivable one. And so therefore, as the Vishnu Puran says, inconceivable and indescribable, they're talking about that. But the very same Śrī Hari makes himself conceivable, makes himself describable.
And he's still full.
Yeah, without any loss. We're not talking about a hierarchical situation. That the conceivable, describable version of him is in any way, shape or form less than. It's not this, and this is fundamental. Because if that would be the case, we're talking about an unknowable God that cannot ever be known, that is actually the best one. And that's not the case at all.
I mean, we often chant the Purnamadam, this, as the fullness is always full. God, and Guruji makes this point so often in satsangs, you can't look at God in any way and say, this is, okay, we talk about Amsha, Avadar, and so on.
But in potentiality, always full.
But still the fullness is there, right? The display may be something different.
That's it.
Right? But the fullness is there. The Lord is always full. And so again, the fundamental tenets of this Siddhanta is the pushing away of hierarchies, right? And, these kind of rigid distinctions and categories.
So yeah, I want to therefore just summarize that and kick us off by saying Śrī Hari, the name we're giving to Bhagavan at the foundational level, is both conceivable and inconceivable. As this person, Śrī Hari, we're saying inconceivable. It's the moniker almost we're giving to the inconceivable, indescribable form of the Lord, which we are absolutely comfortable with. And I made the analogy to Vaikuntha being similar situation, right? However, that very same Lord makes himself describable and perceivable in myriad forms, myriad ways, which I want to touch upon now, or we can move into in a sense. But before we do that, there is an obvious refutation that is often made to something like this, because I am ultimately claiming that Śrī Hari is, in a sense, avatari, is a starting point, or is the name we're giving to this. And you'll have, for example, Vaishnava movements that will say, no, it's Shri Krishna, for example. Shri Krishna is the original Karana Karanam, the cause of all things. They'll point to the Bhagavatam, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. And they'll say, what is your refutation of that? What is your position on that? So let me make that position clear, and feel free to complement that position. There are two, I would say, easy responses to this, and one of them is actually quite a traditional Sri Vaishnava response to this. I've dealt with some Sri Vaishnavas, one of them quite a learned scholar, and I asked this question. I said, look, I have often been presented this as a refutation of the Sri Vaishnava position, that Lakshmi Narayana, in a sense, that Śrīmad Narayana is the original Karana Karanam, in a sense, and that actually Krishna is an avatar of him. And so the Sri Vaishnava says, well, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam is essentially a historically contextualized statement, because the words are spoken, the topic is discussed at the advent of Krishna's incarnation. Krishna is there, at the end of Krishna's incarnation. He's there. It is the one that is predominantly in the landscape at the time. Everyone has just experienced him, thinking of him, etc. And the prompting for the conversation by Parikshit Maharaj is that. It's tell me about Krishna, in a sense, to speak to me about Krishna. There is also the idea of what is the purpose of Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is there to exalt bhakti towards the Lord. And there is no one who's going to debate or argue that in Krishna Leela, that is demonstrably emphasized, especially in the early stages of Krishna Leela. Bhakti, relationship, all of this. And so there is a natural historical context that pushes towards glorifying Krishna. The second answer that the Sri Vaishnavas also have, and that I agree with from our context, is no problem. Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. But you can replace Krishna for Rama, for Hari, for Narasimha, etc. And for us, it will be the exact same statement. Because although we recognize the distinction of the forms and we recognize the distinction of the Leelas.
But they would say that they've listed those already.
Yeah.
And then
but they'll say that they are plenary incarnations, but the one who is the origin of them all is Krishna exclusively.
Yeah, but they would say like, oh, Rama, as part of the list of the different avatars, the 20-odd avatars that they list, and Krishna, Rama, Narasimha, but, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but...
No, it's true, they were both listed.
Yeah, but Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. So they would say, yes, these all are the incarnations, but Krishna is the original form of God. I think that's the rebuttal back. So.
Yeah. Again, I think it's just a difference of opinion there, because for us, I marry those two answers. We're emphasizing him because that is the topic of discussion. It's almost like there's a utility to having Krishna as your primary deity of worship for the purpose of the conversation. It's a utility positioning rather than a tattva position. And remember what I said earlier about principles and then experiential. And I would say experientially, there is merit to having Krishna be your Ishtadev, in a sense, having Krishna be the default go-to form of the Lord, because the Leela is, in a sense, most complete. The display that Krishna brings, what he shows, because we talked about just before, and I'm going to touch upon that a little later. God is God, full, always. That is our theological position. Whether you're talking about Krishna, you're talking about Narasimha, they have the same, let's say, completeness. But what is displayed may be different. What is manifest may be different. So there's a difference between potentiality and what is manifest. So Krishna clearly manifests fullness. He manifests all the varieties of relationships and everything else. So as I said, functionally, utility purposes, putting Krishna in that position makes a lot more sense, because if you put, for example, Narasimha or Vamana or something like this, although it may be factually true, it's the same complete Bhagavan, you're almost like, okay, but there's such little, Leela, so such a small, minute description of this personality. How do you relate yourself? How do you position? How does that serve the purpose for everybody, in a sense, right? So I would answer it in that way. I would contextualize it historically, and I would say that there is a utility to that answer. But theologically speaking, it's untenable that Krishna is in some sense higher or more complete than the others, not only in manifestation, but even in composition.
So how would you understand Swayam Bhagavan of Krishna, and from your reading of Sandarbhas and so on? Like, how does Jiva Goswami actually pitch it?
Well, he bases his whole Krishna Sandarbha on specifically that verse, no? And he says that in Shastra, you always have to look at the big picture, right? And even in the Vaishnava Shastra, there are seeming contradictions, because in the Vishnu Purana, for instance, Krishna is said to manifest from the hairs of Vishnu. Right? So he has to answer that. No, he has to address that.
Yeah, he spends some time on that, doesn't he?
Because it's a valid, it seems like a contradiction, no? And so it seems like a theological problem there. But the way he does this is basically he picks up that verse and he says that verse has the power to overrule all other statements.
This is the Paribhasa.
It's a Paribhasa Sutra.
Yeah.
So basically this quarter of a verse of the Bhagavatam, whatever other statement you find in Shastra, that is automatically overwritten by that particular statement. And he gives a logic for it. But again, it's very selective, no? You can take one single verse of entire Shastra and you say, there might be contradictions, but it overrules everything else.
One thing is, look, we would disagree with the Gaudiya stance and Jiva Goswami stance, and Guruji has his own stance, understood. But I will still applaud the genius of Jiva Goswami.
Sure.
Genius of Jiva Goswami. In the way that he presents these problems, and then I don't want to say conjures up, or that's the wrong word, but like the way he expertly uses the tools available around and presents a very coherent, strong argument. I mean, when you read the Sandarbhas, you have to really, give your pranams and
tip
say,
your hat. Yeah,
that's phenomenal what he does.
There was another point about this that I wanted to make, because I had a talk once with a Gaudiya Vaishnava about this topic. A very good conversation, actually, respectful and everything. And I said, I have a question. My issue is that it often seems, and I asked for them to sort of confirm my interpretation of their position, that it often seems like you're not saying that all forms of the Lord, be it Vishnu, Narasimha, etc., Rama, have the same composition as Krishna, but some other limiting factor is there. For example, when they say that Madhurya is only possible with Krishna, what do you mean by that statement, actually? Do you say that there's an absence of that capacity in Rama, for example, or they don't choose to enact it, but they could if they wanted to? And he sort of took a step back, thought about it, reflected on sort of the Acharya's writings, whatever, and said, I think our position is that it's not possible with those. Like, you cannot have Madhurya with Nrsingadev or whatever it may be, right? And I said, okay, if that be the case, why? Is there something compositionally different from Narasimha to Krishna? Because if you can have it with Krishna but you can't, there must be something missing from Narasimha, other than just choice. Because I told you, is it choice or composition, right? And then I said, and the second challenge I'll put to you is, doesn't that make Narasimha limited? If you can say the word can't, he cannot have this. He does not have the ability. He does not have the capacity for something. How is that person to be called God? Or it clearly creates limitation. Didn't really know how to navigate that either. And then I said, and therefore my conclusion of this is, sequentially, that what you're terming as Vishnu Tattva is actually a very weird composition of beings that are different. They're not actually the same, because by grouping a category, what you're normally doing is you're making a category of people that are identical in composition. So Jiva Tattva, Jivas are compositionally the same, although we have nuances and uniqueness like name, form, experiences, karma, everything else. But in terms of composition, it's the same substance. Right?
So you're saying it kind of betrays the nature of what Tattva is all about.
Yeah, it's almost like, why don't you just put Krishna in his own Tattva? Right? And then put these other plenary incarnations in a separate tattva, because to group them as somehow just being Vishnu
That's
tattva.
kind of what they're doing, would you not agree? It is, okay,
but it could be more blunt. It could be more...
It's not officially, Krishna, not officially a different tattva, but by saying Swam Bhagavan, you are
But if you do that, you run into other problems. Because in other passages of the same Bhagavatam, they have statements like the supreme person, the original person, and then they'll use different names, not only
like
Krishna.
Gajendra's
they'll say Narayana, they'll say Hari, they'll say Vishnu.
Adi Bija,
it's not always Krishna. So even instances in the Bhagavatam where the supreme person is invoked, it's invoked or let's say addressed as by these other names, right? Now again, of course, Jiva Goswami will say, oh, these are just, different names of Krishna, for example, right? Or they'll say, yeah, in a sense, they're all supreme personality, but in another sense, not. Semantics.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to highlight is that this can be argued from multiple angles. This can be viewed as from multiple angles. Our position, however, is that the avatars of the Lord are in potentiality equal. There is no limiting factor except choice of what to manifest.
I think what we're touching upon, and like I said, I have tremendous respect for obviously we have been doing a critical analysis and a comparative analysis and here and there, but I have tremendous respect for the Gaudiya tradition, and what I see is one of the fundamental differences is that their tradition is based on, if I can pronounce it right, specificity. Is that right?
Specificity.
Specificity. God, English is my first language. I should know this. But and it's really about harnessing the Ishtadev, right? So not just Vishnu Śrī Hari, but the Ishtadev of Krishna himself. So that's why Jiva Goswami Tattva.
One step further, even which part of Krishna's life?
Yeah, okay, you go even further. The Tattva Sandarbha is to establish Bhagavatam as the highest pramana above even Shruti, right? Yeah. It is the most, accessible, fully comprehensive source of knowledge.
Conclusion of all other scriptures,
right.
etc.
And so once he's done that, and Bhagavatam, as you said, is placed in the after Krishna leaves the earth, and therefore is a testament to him. And we only have to look at Canto 10 and the depth that goes that Canto 10 is, and you start to realize that's how he builds his case. And I think we have to understand that even Vishnu Purana probably wouldn't go as far as Bhagavatam. Right, even amongst Vaishnava scripture, you won't have that specificity of Krishna. But every shāstra that we use, Mahabharata, it's not a bhakti text, right? It's trying to establish dharma, right? So dharma is the key thing. Even Valmiki, when he writes the Ramayana, it's not. Bhakti is there, no doubt, but the elevation of Lord Ram to the Supreme as a Supreme Lord is not there. Ramacharita does that much more explicitly, right, later on. So every text has its role and has its purpose. Bhagavatam has its role if you have the Ishtadev as Krishna.
Yeah, if I could add one thing regarding the Sandarbhas, because now we've kind of addressed this topic. As you said, it's structured such that Krishna is elevated as the Ishtadev, as the most worshipable deity for that particular tradition. Because in the Vedic tradition, what is quite common for a work is that at the beginning, there is what is called an Anubandha Chatushtaya, which means it includes who is the adhikari for this work. So who is the one who should study this work and who should not study this work. And Jiva Goswami makes it very explicit that this work is only, or this whole philosophical, theological framework is only for someone who wants to worship Krishna specifically, not in a general sense Vishnu, Narayana, Śrī Hari, but specifically Krishna. And then if you have that ambition to follow this philosophical model, theological model, then that's the way to go.
Does he, I don't know, but does he, in that introductory way, does he say that this qualification is the highest qualification? Did you detect that?
He doesn't really make it explicit. No,
okay.
No.
But it could be there. Maybe someone might disagree, but from your understanding, it's...
I mean, I guess it's just very... It's something very deeply rooted to elevate one's own Ishtadev over anybody else. And I guess if you, on the path of bhakti, we talk about a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
You know? How you belong to God and how my specific Lord belongs to me also in a relational sense. So there must be, I think you were asking the question, Guruji, once, is it wrong if my bhakti doesn't have the sense of belonging?
Yeah.
Or the sense of even ownership?
Yeah, that's what I said, yeah.
And so naturally, one will see one's own Ishtadev superior over other manifestations of that same Lord.
Yeah.
Right?
So there's a natural tendency to elevate your Ishtadev.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, I could build a case, let's say, if Nrsingadev is saying, there's no other deity who would be so quick and so direct, and because of his ferocity and mrityu mrityum namamyaham, I bow down to this, the death of death itself. There's no other deity that carries this level of quality. So therefore, he is the avatari, right? He is the ultimate, the supreme, the original form of God, whatever. You can build a case.
One could build a case for sure.
As the issue.
Yeah. And I think it hints also at the principle of tatparya, right? Understanding what is the intention of the text. And if you see, we talked about this in the second episode, Upakrama Samhara, the idea of the beginning and the conclusion of a text. If you see the beginning of the Bhagavatam, it essentially says, please give me the condensed essence of scripture. What is the essence of scripture? And as we know, the conversation between the Vedavyasa and Narada, and it says the chastising of Narada to Vedavyasa is, what about bhakti? Like, the bhakti has not been fully elaborated upon. And as I said earlier, there are utility purposes for, if you're going to expound bhakti, to not exclusively speak about Krishna, but to hone in on Krishna because of that reason.
I mean, look at the sutras, the Brahma Sutras, Atato Brahma Jignasa. Now let us investigate Brahman. It's not now let us investigate Madhurya Rasa, right? Yeah. That's not the point of Brahma Sutras, right? And so like that, Bhagavatam has this role.
We touched upon Jiva Goswami, and I think we were full of praise for him. Let's praise him a bit more as we transition into our presentation of the four concepts of how God is perceptible, in a sense, the facets of God. And this starts, I think, it's rooted in a little bit also Jiva Goswami's presentation of the emphasis placed on the distinctions of Brahma, Paramatma, Bhagavan in the Bhagavatam. So do you want to touch upon that a little bit and just sort of map out what he claims, what he brought to the table, what he emphasized that had not really been emphasized before, and then we can build our, let's say, modifications onto that.
So sure, in the second chapter of the first canto of Bhagavatam, there's a specific verse where it says, Vadanti tattvavidas tattvam yajnanam advayam. So this non-dual consciousness, Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagwan iti shabdyate. So the learned transcendentalists know this non-dual consciousness as being manifest as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. And of course, Jiva Goswami is not the first Vaishnava commentator who comments on the Bhagavatam, but previous commentators have kind of just skipped over this verse, obviously given the comment, but not, drawn too much theological insights from it.
Yep.
They just say, okay, in the scriptures you find Śrī Hari being, called Brahman in some places, Paramatma in many places, Bhagwan in, let's say, more the Puranic tradition.
All the same somehow.
It's all the same. It's different names of the Supreme Lord. But Jiva Goswami geniusly makes these specific distinctions, how the Lord is revealed to a spiritual practitioner, right? Either as Brahman, that undifferentiated consciousness, Paramatma as the indweller of beings and as the cosmic indweller, right, with a function in relation to creation, and then as Bhagwan, which he would say is the most complete realization, the most complete manifestation of the Lord, where he engages in a personal lila with his devotees, where he's full of all these bhagas, all these qualities, as mentioned in the Vishnu Purana. So he draws out a hierarchy there, but also his genius, in a sense, is that he acknowledges an impersonal realization of the Supreme, right, in the form of Brahman.
Yeah.
So compare that with, say, the Sri Vaishnavas. How would they, say, look at this verse?
Well, of course, at the time of Ramanuja, he didn't specifically comment on the Bhagavatam.
Yeah, so that's
right?
Vishnu Puran, but later on, the later acharyas, what would they say, or how would they deal with this verse? Do you know?
I mean, in Sri Vaishnava tradition, you accept this, they have this concept of Kaivalya, which is more a form of self-realization, right? And where the self is realized in isolation from Prakriti.
Like a Sankhya.
In a sense, it's more in this kind of context. But still, the realization of Brahman goes a step further than self-realization.
Yeah.
And this, to my knowledge, you don't really find in other Vaishnava.
So the Sri Vaishnavas, the kind of Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan are kind of synonyms. They're very much on the same level. Brahman, you would take us from the Upanishads primarily, but Paramatma, Bhagavan, Vasudeva, Narayana, also not synonyms.
Yeah, for instance, if you look at Ramanuja's writing, he speaks often about Brahman.
Yeah.
And he just takes it completely synonymously with Srimad Narayana.
So he doesn't really acknowledge Shankaracharya's perception of the supreme truth as this non-dual reality attribute.
He doesn't
He just says Kaivalya is self-realization. That's the closest he would put it.
Yeah, there's no acknowledgement of an impersonal realization of the supreme. I think his point is also that it's the same Bhagavan that is pervading everything, that is sitting inside everything. And so Brahman, they would. I've heard Sri Vaishnavas discuss it as being, oh, that's just Krishna in everything, right? And that when you perceive it inside of yourself, you can call it Paramatma. But it's the same thing. There's no distinction in what you're perceiving here and there, and as Bhagavan, it's actually just completely the same.
But just to be clear, as you said, Jiva Goswami draws a hierarchy. Brahman is the impersonal realization, akin to what the Advaitins would propose as their ultimate truth, but he puts that as the most subordinate level, as impersonal. Above that would be the Paramatma realization. And understand, these are perceptions of the same non-dual reality. That's what the verse said. So the same thing exists, but you are perceiving it in different ways.
Depending on your qualification.
But there's an important distinction, because to Jiva Goswami, the Paramatma is Vishnu. Yeah, it's four-armed Vishnu form. It's not, we're not talking about and then Bhagavan is, of course, Shri Krishna. Krishna is the Bhagavan Swayam. And so there is also a difference in personality and form, and therefore what can be had in terms of relationship. Because what I said earlier, if you add rasa theology on top of this, and you understand that you can't have this Madhurya with four-armed Vishnu, then again, there is what is possible here and what is not possible here. And so you have to go to Bhagavan, in Jiva Goswami's presentation, to have certain experiences that you cannot have elsewhere.
You want to say
so even if the Paramatma, suppose even Krishna could manifest as the Paramatma, still this is seen as subordinate, because the emphasis is very much on this external lila where the Lord is embodied and you can engage with him on that platform.
But that's the beautiful practical consequence. This is where, again, I said we're going to present Tattva, and there's going to be practical consequence to this. The practical consequence of that is, of course, everything in the Gaudiya tradition becomes far more externalized. I'm not saying that there isn't an internal appreciation for the presence of God within ourselves, etc. But that's why something like yoga, Atma Kriya Yoga, find God within, even when I've explained it to someone, a Gaudiya, for example, it's very devotional. It's nothing to do with Advaita. It's finding God within. They'd be like, great, but I'm not interested in the God within, because the God within is four-armed Vishnu. I don't want four-armed Vishnu. I want Krishna in his, flute playing form. Because that's not in here.
Describe Goloka Vrindavan. This you enjoy doing this, right? How it's very personalized, isn't it? The kind of descriptive understanding of Goloka Vrindavan.
Yeah, it's very much personalized, because again, this lila, this let's say humanly understandable lila, which Krishna has performed here all these thousands of years ago, is believed to be eternally going on in that eternal realm. So Krishna is there, he's with the cows, he's with the gopas, he's with the gopis, Mother Yashoda is there, Nanda Baba is there, and he has this, you could say, these eightfold pastimes, and it's very...
Where's this taken from, primarily, do you know? This descriptions?
I mean, a lot of this comes from the tradition itself, from the writings of the Acharyas themselves, based on their realizations or their devotional insights, right? Of course, you could find it in some Puranas.
Yeah,
but again, I don't want to question the validity of search.
No.
But
I'm just curious.
It's coming primarily from the tradition itself.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's state our concept then. We've talked about, in a sense, what Jiva Goswami did that was different.
Yeah.
So how do we change from that? What is our presentation?
Right. So let's say historically, like before we had this Tādātmya Vedānta, this Siddhanta, Guruji, I mean, over the years, he's gone through many different phases, right? Obviously, his core message has always stayed the same, love for God, but...
Bhakti, Sharanagati.
Exactly.
Śrī Hari, yeah.
Exactly. So that's always been there. But the way he was explaining it, also you see this with, let's say, the temple inaugurations, what kind of temples he was at a specific time. Narasimha was the predominant deity. There was Vittala, and so on. So there's different phases in Guruji's teachings, let's say. And eventually he brought in saints like Kabir, like Guru Nanak, and the way they speak about bhakti, the way they speak about their Lord is very devotional, for sure, but it seems a little bit impersonal somehow. Because if you look at the writings of, let's say, someone like Mirabai, she's pining, she's longing for her giridhari with a flute, with a yellow cloth, pitambara, etc.
Like the Alvars as well.
Alvars also, yeah. But if you look at these kind of saints, and they're sometimes by scholars or even the tradition called Nirguna Bhakti saints, they don't conceive of the Lord in that way. And so for me personally, but I guess for many of us, it was a bit of a philosophical issue there.
Yeah.
Because if you have this conception of Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagwan, the question is, who are they talking about?
Yeah.
They can't be talking about Brahman, because Brahman is just this undifferentiated, pure consciousness, which, devoid of all qualities, and it's not the object of devotion ultimately. And obviously Guruji wouldn't elevate them as much as he does.
Yeah.
So it can't be Brahman, but again, it's also not Paramatma in a sense.
Just within.
Certainly not Bhagavan.
But certainly not Bhagavan. So the question is, what exactly, how exactly do they relate to the Lord? What is this perception which they have? What is their realization? It can't be Brahman. It's somehow not Paramatma. It's not Bhagavan. So, what we consider a manifestation of Śrī Hari in our Vedanta is this Parabrahman, right? Which is this all-pervasive form of the Lord, this omnipresent aspect of the Lord, which is not an emptiness, but a fullness, which allows for, a relationship of prema, of divine love. And so it's a philosophical framework which explains very much the realization of these great, you could call them Nirguna Bhakti saints, such as Kabir, such as Dadu Dayal, such as Guru Nanak, such as Ravidas. And many of the Maharashtra saints you could also put in that category. How they acknowledge that the Lord is in the deity, but they say, my Lord is not in the deity necessarily, or not just in the deity, but my Lord is omnipresent. He's always with me. He's inside me. He's outside me. I perceive him everywhere.
So just to contextualize, so Jiva Goswami has laid down this situation of Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan from this Bhagavatam verse. Guruji has, how would you describe it? Like he is in agreement with the marriage of the impersonal aspect of Brahman as a perception of the ultimate reality of Śrī Hari. So that is, he's in full agreement with Jiva Goswami in his presentation. Where things start to differ is the hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
Of Paramatma and Bhagavan, and then also, as you just described, another introduction, another perception of the supreme non-dual reality, which is Parabrahman. And so for Guruji, yes, we say the Advaitin perception is subordinate to the personal perception. The impersonal perception is subordinate to the personal perception. So if you experience Brahman as a great jnani, Advaita jnani, then that would be, like as he described with us, like sitting next to somebody and experiencing the heat of that person, but not necessarily perceiving the person itself, himself or herself. So it's a distance, or the shadow of the toe of Narayan.
It's an incomplete perception.
Incomplete perception, the shadow of the toe of Narayan. That's how the Brahman realization works. And so Guruji strongly states that is a subordinate situation, as does Jiva Goswami. But then Jiva Goswami creates another category of Paramatma, where the yogi perceives him within in this Chaturbhujam four-handed form. And then you have the Uttama Bhakta, who has this ultimate relationship with Krishna in the two-handed form in Vraj, let's say, particularly. That point is where where Guruji differs, because there is no hierarchy. Paramatma, the Lord within, can be anything. It doesn't have to be fixated in this four-handed form. Also, Bhagavan in a two-handed form is equivalent to the Paramatma that you see. There is no hierarchical distinction. It's still the same fullness. Remember what we said before, Purnamada, Purnamidam. The Lord is always full in his personal aspect here. So we perceive him within, and we can perceive him without, but then you bring in this whole thing of Parabrahman, yeah? And I think in our sutras, is it, correct me if I'm, Purna Bhagavan Avagaha, which is this immersion into the fullness of the Lord. And this describes the experience, the Tadatmya Anubhava of the likes of Kabir, Nanak, and so on. What commonly are described as Nirguna Bhaktis, but they are actually immersed in Bhagavan to such an extent they're having a dynamic relationship, but with the whole nature and movement of life. Can I just quote this? I've got this here. That Guruji, in one of his writings, he says, he's talking about Radha now and the experience of Radharani. He says, her heart ever flowing with grace and mercy would call only one sound, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. Food was Krishna. So listen to this. Food was Krishna. Sleep was Krishna. Tears were Krishna. Laughter was Krishna. Beatings were Krishna. Love was Krishna. She forgot herself in her love, right? A perfect description of Tadatmya Anubhava, forgetting herself and the ahamkara as we described. That was in the previous episode. But the point is here, look at what he's saying here. Laughter, beatings, food, sleep. The very movement and dance of life is Krishna. Right? And that's what we mean by Purna Bhagavan Avagaha, to be immersed in life and see the fullness of life and understand that this is a form of Krishna. It may not be a form that you can picture in what the Sri Vaishnavas call Divya Mangala Sharira, this very fixated form, but it's the form of life and the fullness of life and everything. I read this book, this microphone, the dynamic dance. You are constantly playing with Krishna through the movements of life. And you're constantly like a pot in the ocean, absolutely immersed in him. And so that is what the Brahman realization, a perception of that non-dual reality, what Guruji is giving, that's what it explains. And like I said, you can have the Lord. Guruji describes that the realization of Tadatmya Anubhava begins with the Lord within. That's he's clear about.
Yep.
It's not a hierarchical thing, but it's a chronological thing that the Lord awakens from within the heart, like chapter 10, from within the heart I lift a lamp of knowledge and dispel the darkness of ignorance. That happens, Paramatma awakens, and in one satsang I remember him saying, it accelerates and kind of almost erupts outwardly as the Brahman realization. So the whole of life, Vasudeva Sarvam, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, all of this is Krishna, all of this is Vittala, all of this is Pandurenga, or Ram, whoever it is, however you see. And then that becomes the movement of life. But the possibility of Bhagavan as the fixated Divya Mangala Sharira, the condensed form of bliss, that also where we have dynamic external interaction, which is what the Gaudias are primarily focused on.
Many Rasic traditions of Vrindavan and
yes.
Yeah.
So all of these things are dynamically playing out and there's no hierarchy, and it's quite possible that a devotee would one day have an ecstatic state of he's in my heart, like Savitamali, this in Bakari. Saints of how the Lord hides in his heart, right?
His daughter sticking out.
Yeah, and his daughter just coming out of his chest like that. And then you have, as you said, the Nanak and Kabir and so on, the dance of life. And then you have Mirabai, Giridhari's right here, or Andal, Krishna's right here. So all of these things you see in this model that Guruji has proposed. Again, a building off Jiva Goswami in some respect, but still very different as well, encompasses the Hari Bhaktas from multiple traditions.
Exactly. It so beautifully marries all these saints, all these different Bhaktas of Śrī Hari. Because we're the Hari Bhakta Sampradaya, any Bhakta of Śrī Hari in whatever manifestation, whatever form is welcome, right? So this Parabrahman notion so beautifully marries these, so-called Nirguna saints, Nirguna Bhakti saints. I have to qualify Bhakti saints because Guruji, we do make the distinction between those who have realized Brahman, but those who are, through Bhakti have realized the fullness of Śrī Hari.
I want to make a point about that after you're done.
So there's clearly a hierarchy, but in the sense of Paramatma, Bhagwan, Parabrahman, it's the fullness of Śrī Hari. So if we ask the question, what is the uniting feature of all these great Bhakti saints? It's for sure not the particular aspect they're worshipping, because if you ask Mirabai, she worships only Giridhari and exclusively, right? She knows Shri Ram is the same Lord, but she will not chant the name of Rama. She will not worship Sri Rama, right? knowing that it's the same Lord. Same with Goswami Tulsidas. If you ask him, what does your Lord look like? Who is your Lord? He would say he's the son of Dasharatha, he's the husband of Sita, he's the object of devotion for Hanuman.
The bearer of the bow. Yeah.
Exactly. But if you ask these saints like Dadu Dayal, Kabir, Nanak, Ravidas, some of the Maharashtra saints potentially, they would say, if you ask them the same question, who is your Lord? What does he look like? They might give you an answer such as, he doesn't have any names, and yet all names are his. He doesn't have any form, but yet all forms are his. So they are much more concerned about the Lord on a cosmic scale than on, let's say, a more human interaction.
Yeah.
All-pervading.
All-pervading.
But the key thing is Tadatmya Anubhava. So there is no obliteration of tattva.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And there's dynamic two-way relationship.
Exactly.
Characterized by immersion, though. I think immersion again, because all these saints have in common their immersion into their conception of God, or whichever one it is.
That's another good point. Brahman realization is common to every Hari Bhakta.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to make. For instance, if you turn at to the Bhagavatam, in 11th canto, there's a description of the different bhaktas, no? Who's the topmost bhakta, Bhagavata, who's the Madhyama, who's the Kanishta.
Yes.
And actually, if you look at the verse, it says, Sarva Bhuteshu Yav Pashed Bhagavad Bhavam Atmanaha. So the one who sees his own manifestation of the Lord as residing in all beings, and then the second line says that if you see everybody to reside in the Lord, right, who has this perception of the Lord being everywhere, being omnipresent, Esha Bhagavatottama, so he is the Uttama Bhagavata.
It's amazing because actually the primary criteria for the gradation of the quality of a devotee is how widespread is his realization of God. In a sense, if it's just localized in the deity, you're at the Kanishta level. And not only that, it's also not. What I love about those verses is that it's not only talking about the perception, but also the behavior that then goes along with said perception. Because if you only see Bhagavan in the deity, and therefore, as a consequence of that, disrespect everything else, you're at the very low level. But at the highest level, at the Uttama level, you are seeing Bhagavan everywhere and consequently engaging with everything as you would with Bhagavan.
Yeah.
Right?
Just on the note of seeing, because the verse, for instance, says Pashyati. And we have a very similar verse also in the Bhagavad Gita where he says, Yomam Pashyati Sarvatra, he who sees me everywhere. Interestingly, the word Pash is not derived from like a root such as Pashyati is not derived from a root such as Pash or something, but actually it comes from Drish.
Okay.
Right? And Drish just like Darshana. So Darshana is derived from Drish. So Pashyati and Darshana, they come from the same root. But the thing is here, it's not just seeing with the physical eyes, right? But it's more an anubhava, so a perception, a realization. Yeah. It's not just through one sense modality, but the immersion of one's entire being in that Supreme Lord.
Yeah. So this perception of Paramatma, Bhagavan, and Parabrahman is characterized by Tadatmya Anubhava, the experience of Prem. Right, and that's
exactly.
kind of what you're getting at.
Exactly,
That's
the
perception.
Thing. It's not just physical seeing, because, for instance,
it's the point we made on the previous episode where we said, otherwise you're just seeing a vision.
Yeah.
Right.
Visions come and go. Realization is a permanent thing.
Yeah.
I want to make another distinction between our position and Jiva Goswami's position. Maybe not so much a distinction, but rather a nuance. Out of these four that we have, we talk about Brahman, we talk about Paramatma, Parabrahman, and Bhagavan. We say that three of them are complete, one is incomplete. So we say Brahman is an incomplete cognition, whereas the other three are full cognitions. I would say that the three are actual presentations of himself by God, by Śrī Hari. Śrī Hari says, I present myself as Bhagavan.
He's inconceivable, but...
The inconceivable Śrī Hari makes himself conceivable through Bhagavan, through Parabrahman, through Paramatma, not through Brahman, in a sense. It is him that is being conceived, but it's an incomplete conception of Parabrahman, actually. What Brahman realization is an incomplete realization of Parabrahman, the actual presentation of Śrī Hari, right? And so there's something beautiful that gets, let's say, resolved or gets dealt with as a result of this. Not only have the introduction of Parabrahman reconciles all these other Nirguna Hari Bhakts in a sense that we discussed, it also reconciles Advaitins outside of Vaishnavism, outside of Bhakti in a sense, because our understanding of what Brahman realization would be for them is incomplete. It's an incomplete realization. And because it's incomplete, and because Śrī Hari is, by definition, compassionate, he is merciful, he is loving, right? It necessarily means that he will never allow them to finish at that position their journey of realization, their journey of spirituality. And this is very fundamentally different to other traditions' conceptions, because what it means then is we, first of all, behaviorally have a more relaxed position towards the Advaita situation, because it's not an eternal suicide into Brahman. When we talk about the Bhagavatam and the different types of moksha that God is offering, Samipya, Sarupya, Salokya, and Sayujya, Sayujya from some interpretations is you merge, you cease to exist. The Lord is offering. You don't accept as a Vaishnava. But if you so want it, as the Advaitin, as the Nirguna would, the Nirguna following person would want, the Lord gives it. It's like, okay, well, you asked for it, so here you go. And it's an end of story, exactly. Done. You've merged, you cease to exist. There is no coming back from that, right? You merge into the Brahma Jyoti, something like this, they would say. But that's a little crude from Bhagavan. Yes, okay, you asked for it, but it's an eternal outcome. And they'll eternally be robbed of that prema that is had at the relationship level with Bhagavan.
I've heard this, like some people say, but the very constitutional nature of the soul is nityadas. And so how does that get reconciled in the Brahman realization?
It seems to be obliterated by Bhagavan, by granting
but some people have said, if you put a flower next to the Lord, the flower is serving the Lord.
Yes.
But there's no activity, but it's still serving the Lord. So like that in the Brahman realization, there's a kind of passive service.
Okay.
I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
I believe we handle it a little better in our theology. Forgive me for saying it. But what essentially Guruji is saying is the experience will be granted. The same way, if one desires heavenly planets, one goes to heavenly planets. If one thinks of, one conducts himself in a different way but makes different choices, you'll experience hellish planets. But neither of those are permanent outcomes. Both the heavenly and the hellish planets result in you returning here to continue your journey because you have not completed. There is no fulfillment. The fulfillment of life is found in Prem, in Tādātmya Anubhava, in that immersion into Bhagavan, the fullness of Bhagavan, the fullness of Śrī Hari, right? And so the issue here is that, or not the issue, the beauty here is that the realized sort of Brahman, the Brahman realization, the Advaitins who have attained their realization, Guruji is essentially saying they will be brought back into incarnation in an exalted state. So it's not that they go from the beginning or they're condemned for their realization. Not at all. They are brought back in an exalted state to continue their cognition of Śrī Hari, because as we said, this is an incomplete cognition. Brahman realization is an incomplete perception of the Lord.
But it also shows you, in Guruji's philosophy, that there is a compulsion of the Atma to be with Bhagavan in the personal aspect and experience bhakti.
You're right. Let's hold that off until we get to the Atma section.
Okay.
Because I want to blow it up there and unpack it more. I want to draw another point about what the Parabrahman, let's say, addition adds to our life practically as Bhakti Marga devotees. Forgive me. And that is an appreciation, I would say, a greater appreciation for life itself. As you read the writing from Guruji on Radha, the description of Radha saying, laughter was Krishna, tears were Krishna, this and that was Krishna. It's that once you say that the fullness of God is everywhere, the way you engage with life, it draws the potential for you to celebrate life. It draws the potential for you to look upon life not as something to be escaped from, not as this is a fallen condition, this is a fallen world, this is something bad and negative, but rather we can make this synonymous with Vaikuntha, as we talked about in the last episode. Bhu Vaikuntha. In a sense, the all-pervasion of the fullness of God depicted in the Parabrahman concept naturally leads into the all-pervasiveness of Vaikuntha, because Vaikuntha is, in a sense, non-different from the Lord himself. It's an extension from him. By definition, it's the constant darshan of him. So if he's everywhere, Vaikuntha is everywhere, almost logically as a follow-up. And so this becomes the potential Vaikuntha. It has potentiality for Vaikuntha. Right now, in the room with us, Vaikuntha is here, Parabrahman is here. Our cognition may not perceive it, but that's on us in a sense, right?
Yeah.
That's a relational issue. But fundamentally, it is here.
Yeah.
And just conceiving of that, just having that thought, enlivens you. It makes you much more, as I said, appreciative, motivated, empowered somehow to engage with God.
Yeah, I mean, even the way I describe it is when you meet Guruji and you have, as many of us have had, these kind of experiences, moments, however you want to put it, where you are connecting with something transcendent. It's not it goes beyond mind, it goes beyond emotion, all your psychology, and it comes to the fundamental core of who you are in absolute essence. And you experience that with Guruji. I've had moments like that where I know that he knows that I know that he knows that I know that he knows that we are in this situation. And you know what I mean? This kind is so fundamental. We get moments of that, right? Through Guruji, through the Sadguru, maybe through chanting, maybe through the deity. I don't know. Everyone has their own way, right? But what we're saying is the fragrance of Vaikuntha is available in these moments, right? We're materially conditioned souls with egos and desires and everything else. But the potentiality of Bhul Vaikuntha, the aroma, the rich fragrance of Vaikuntha is available. And Guruji is making Vaikuntha, the experience of God, Tādātmya Anubhava, sainthood, all of these things far more imminent.
Yeah.
And then what that does is it puts tremendous responsibility on all of us to say, you have to get it.
It's available.
Yeah, you can't
why
put
are you
it
not
off.
pursuing it? Yeah.
You can't put it off to the afterlife. I shed the body and then I go to Vaikuntha. No, it's now. You have to.
It does away with any like ageism and all these kind of things as well. It's like, well, I'm only young. I'm 20. You know, I have long life ahead of me until I have to worry about those things. Like, no, every second you're here, the option is available to you already. The potentiality is available right now. That's another distinction between us and say Ramanuja's position, because Ramanuja, again, only after death you can get to Vaikuntha. So in this scenario, there's an imminent, I wouldn't say pressure, but
I would say pressure.
Urgency.
I'll let you say it then. But there is almost like an urgency. Yeah, maybe an urgency. There is a calling saying it's available.
But look,
do you want it?
You get pockets of this in Śrī Vaishnava. Like you go to Śrī Rangam and they have this concept of a Bhul Vaikuntha there, right? In a temple in Śrī Rangam.
But it's very localized.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm trying to say is it's a biopsy.
Okay, let me use that to bring another point forward that I think is another big distinction as well. This is all a question of emphasis. So I'm not making a claim now that the Śrī Vaishnavas nor that the Gaudiyas don't have all-pervading conception of God. They do. In their own way, they do. But my point is that it is not at all emphasized or necessarily described in the same way that we're describing it. But what it means, though, is that because the Gaudiya situation of the Brahman Paramahama Bhagavan is hierarchical, and Bhagavan is at the top of that hierarchy, and as I described, what you have inside the Paramahama is different from the Bhagavan that they're pursuing, their devotional life becomes very externalized and hyper-focused on where is the peak of that form experienced best. So take something like Vrindavan. It is a common experience of mine that when I speak to Gaudiya Vaishnavas anywhere else in the world, they're all pining to be in Vrindavan. They're almost like, oh, how fortunate you are that you've been in Vrindavan.
But Rupa Goswami says, is it Rupa Goswami says that?
Actually, when they speak about the 5 most potent factors that awaken bhakti, such as hearing Bhagavatam, worshipping the Murti, chanting Harinam, one of them is actually Mathura Vas, so residing in Vrindavan.
I spoke to 30-year Vaishnava in Brazil, and he was, I don't want to mischaracterize his mood, but really sad at how much time he has had to spend away from Vrindavan, and he felt like he's been deprived of something. Like there's something missing that he cannot do anything about, because Vrindavan is factually over there, and I'm over here, right? And this was something that I could really see was hurting his heart pretty much, right? Now, I'm not making a critique on whether that's right or wrong. That's not my point. I'm highlighting a difference.
Yeah, it could be his dharma as an individual to actually be in Vrindavan, hence why he has this longing.
Sure.
Right?
And I also, like you said earlier, I'm not devaluing sampradayas that bring forward specificity. Like if you're specializing in Madhurya Bhav, Krishna Leela, Vrindavan, and that's just your thing, this is what we focus on. That is not a condemnation at all. I'm drawing distinction. Yeah. And so because we don't have Parabrahman hierarchically inferior to Bhagavan, there is way less of an impetus or emphasis on that for us. It's in a sense more not only internalized but universal. So there isn't this we've got to be in Vrindavan in Bhakti Marga thing. Guruji is not like, being in Vrindavan or being in Jagannath Puri or being in Śrī Rangam or being in somewhere like this is more exalted than being in London or Paris or wherever else. It's about where is he not?
London Vaikuntha.
Yes, in a sense. Where is Bhagavan not?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so this is somehow just another point I wanted to make. Behaviorally, it makes a cultural difference in these different sampradayas and different traditions as well. And in a sense, it means, consequently, Guruji just doesn't care so much about specifics. It just cares that you love God. Do you love God? Are you pursuing God, irrespective of where you are? And not only like as an acceptance attitude, but as a there is no difference attitude where you are. It's not like you should be in acceptance and humble, even though it would be nicer if you were in Vrindavan. It's like it doesn't matter where you are. Instead, what matters is just love.
I would also caveat though, the apta, the masters, the gurus, the saints, where they have conglomerated, right? There is a certain vibrational situation. And I think Guruji does very much acknowledge that in these pilgrimage sites. And so in that sense, Vrindavan, Sri Rangam, wherever it is, they are vibrationally present. The Lord is sometimes more tangible to the conditioned soul.
Exactly.
In that sense.
Because the devotees there, they make him more accessible.
Yes.
Because they have that connection.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to touch upon one thing that we mentioned, and I think maybe it wasn't clear enough, maybe for the listeners, which is when you mentioned the Nirguna Bhaktas, right? It may seem like we are propagating a Nirguna aspect of the Lord as being equivalent. What do we mean by Nirguna? Is this Advaita in a sense? Are we going into an Advaitic concept of Nirguna or not? Because there are different ways to conceive of Nirguna, and I just want to clarify that position. Do you want to tackle it?
Yeah, sure.
Or
So
Byron?
whenever we speak about, again, sometimes this distinction is drawn in academics or sometimes also in the tradition between these Nirguna Bhakti saints and Saguna Bhakti saints. But again, through this Para-Brahman notion, they are reconciled, and the uniting factor is that they perceive their Lord everywhere. The one group has a more, let's say, not humanized, but a more understandable, humanly understandable realization of the Lord, whereas the other Nirguna Bhakti saints, they have more a cosmic, they are more drawn to the cosmic Leela of the Lord.
Yeah.
For instance, if you look at the writings of Guru Nanak, he will praise how the Lord is the reservoir of all manifestation, how through his command, his will, everything happens, right? It's also a Leela of sort.
I mean, like Namdev, the dog. Is it Namdev? Did I get that right?
Namdev, yeah.
Yeah, the dog, where the dog comes and steals his chapati, right? And then it runs off, and then he chases the dog and says, Lord, Lord, you're going to get a stomachache if you have this chapati, and then here's some ghee, and so on like that. And like the very movement of life is happening. And so you see here, Para-Brahman, this Nirguna, I don't know if scholars would class him as Nirguna, because there is this two-handed form with Vittal as well. But let's just go to the Nirguna, is that the idea of Rupa, we have become too fixated with the idea that Rupa means fixated borders, right? Actual ornaments and features, fingers, bracelets, crown, dhoti, whatever. That is Rupa, right? Whereas Guruji is expanding that idea of Rupa in a more cosmic sense, as you said. And so what happens is the qualities are there, the fullness is there, the dynamic interaction with that fullness is there. And so therefore it's a form, nonetheless, it is a Rupa, but just not that Rupa that we're so used to understanding.
And I'd actually like to give a little twist of that word Nirguna, because guna, we have the three gunas of Prakriti, guna as qualities, right? And I would actually like to gloss this meaning of Nirguna as beyond the gunas. No, it's also done in the Bhagavatam and other scriptures how, for instance, a description is giving bhakti as sattvic bhakti, rajasic bhakti, tamasic bhakti, and then Nirguna Bhakti, which transcends the gunas of Prakriti. And when we speak of the Nirguna Bhakti saints, they have a notion of the Lord, or rather a realization that is beyond, Nirguna is beyond the limitation that we might have of the Lord, right? Because when we think of, because the question is, suppose we want to visualize the Lord, I want to visualize Krishna in my mind. My mind is bound by the gunas of Prakriti, so whatever is, you could say, whatever is created by the mind it's still a material thing. It's a material thought.
Sure.
Right? So their conception, not just conception, but their realization transcends this human understanding of who is Śrī Hari.
Yeah.
And I would make one further qualification, which is that often this dialogue goes, or Nirguna is taken just to mean form or no form, right? And I don't think that's the paradigm that Guruji works along. It's not that does God have form or does not have form. It's more to refute allegations of this is Advaita, what you're saying. It's more, is it a person or is it impersonal? Personal or impersonal? Because even in this formless aspect, it's still personal. This is the point that these bhaktas are making. They're dealing with a personality that has will, it's interactive. Even if it's not to a form, it's a universal interaction, but it's interactive and it's a personality.
And it's as intimate.
So this is the nice distinction, because we're basically saying that we're comfortable with the formless dichotomy. We had the Vishnu Puran verse in the beginning saying he is formless and at the same time he has hands and feet and all of this. Guruji saying that Lord has both form and no form. But personality always personal.
But go back to what Guruji said about Radha here. Laughter is Krishna. So when you're how intimate do you want to be? Whether every single movement of life, you're just going, that is Krishna. That is my Krishna, who I belong to, who loves me and I love him. And you're identifying every single thing that happens in life with him. I can't think of a more intimate way, actually, of understanding. So if the accusation is Parabrahman is impersonal or, it's a very distant form, I think it's complete opposite.
And actually another thing that comes to my mind here, when we look at let's say the very Rasic traditions of Vrindavan, where they're all about the Leela of Krishna and whatever. Interestingly, they have this concept of when you see the Lord versus when you're away from the Lord, right? This union and separation, right? And actually, they present the separation from the Lord as even superior in a sense than the meeting with the Lord.
Good point,
Because then you actually perceive him even stronger everywhere.
And
that's a really interesting point, because Bhagwan is presented as the supreme, but then again, if you actually look at these traditions, they still emphasize, in a sense, this separation, as the highest manifestation of love.
Almost pain in separation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I've underestimated how much we were going to discuss all of this. I think it's very compelling stuff, because we've been going for almost an hour and a half and we still have more tattvas to unpack.
Okay.
So let me just set the foundation very briefly, now just sort of in a matter-of-fact way, for the next topic, which essentially is going to be Shiva and Devi Tattva and then Guru Tattva, rather Atma and then Guru. But I want to say our conception of God is very traditional in one sense also. So when we talk about Swarupa Visheshana, Swabhava Visheshana of God, we're talking about Satyam Jnanam Anantam Amalam Ananda, the six bhagas of Vishnu Purana afterwards as relational qualities of the Lord, perceptible by others. We categorize them into Mukhya and Gaunya. We have the primary and the secondary qualities of the Lord. So all of this, I don't want to unpack that now, but essentially that is how we define Bhagavan in however much he can be defined. Let's put it like this. It is traditional, it is orthodox. That is not where we differentiate from other traditions. And maybe that's also why I'm not diving into that right now, because I want to more spend time highlighting where there is something novel or something a little different in our Siddhanta. But it's important to just state this for the awareness of the listener, that this is our conception nonetheless, because of Tādātmya Vedānta. Because when we talk about Tādātmya Vedānta as the spectrum of identification with the Lord, and you have the Lord with his Swarupa Visheshana and Swabhava Visheshana on one end, and you have Prakriti on the other end, and we're going to measure the other tattvas somehow on that scale, on that spectrum, then it's important that I just set the definition for what Bhagavan is, technically speaking, so that then other things can start to make more sense in their positioning. Okay, that's all I'm saying about that topic. Not very developed, but just because of time. So therefore, Shiva and Devi, we touched upon them at the beginning, but I now want to technically explain their position in the Siddhanta in relation to this definition of Bhagavan. We talk about Shiva and Devi. Guruji presents Shiva and Devi as being essentially manifestations of specific Shaktis of Bhagavan, specific qualities, Visheshana almost of Bhagavan. And so we're talking at them as Visheshana Murtis, right? This is the term for Shiva and Devi. In the case of Shiva, it is Chit, consciousness. He is the Visheshana Murti, the manifest form of the Lord's consciousness. So he is not the Lord, but he is a quality of the Lord manifest. And it is sufficient distinction of identity to make his own tattva. However, as we said on the Tadatmya Valley spectrum, that tattva is placed at the very extreme of that spectrum as being almost identical with the Lord. Because although it may share in the Swarupa Visheshana of the Lord, which the Atma also does, in the Swabhava Visheshana, meaning omnipotence, omniscience, all of these kind of qualities, it has much more alignment. Like, so someone like Shiva, by being consciousness, obviously has omnipresence, omniscience, because consciousness is unrestricted. So he shares much more of the qualities of the Lord. And hence, in that sense, we're placing him on that spectrum of Tadatmya Valley far, far closer to Bhagavan than we would even the Jivas, the Atmas, right? So that's that. I mean, we can also speak of Shiva as a Gunavatar, even Devi as a Gunavatar, as the consorts of the Gunavatars. But again, I don't think it's a point of emphasis. Again, it's also quite commonly found in other traditions. And so again, not something that we want to emphasize. I think Shiva and Devi as Visheshana Murtis is less commonly found. I think that's something. In the case of Devi, it's the Shakti of the Lord. And we say that both of them are transcendent to Jagat, to Prakriti, to the manifest material world. So when we talk about the Akshara Brahman in chapter 8 of Krishna's abode is beyond the process of Shrishti and Pralaya, everything else is there, only my abode is eternal, we're essentially saying that Shiva and Devi form part of that categorization. We talk about Vaikuntha as having chambers. Devi and Shiva almost have chambers on the outskirts of Vaikuntha, on the periphery of Vaikuntha, right? Due to their proximity in identity with the Lord, the nature of their being. They're not positions occupied by jivas such as Brahma. Brahma is a position occupied by jivas, for example, Indra, so on and so forth. We draw that distinction when it comes to Shiva and Devi. When it comes to Shiva, we speak of the Shiva in each universe, but there is a primordial Shiva. We term it as Sadashiva, for example. We talk about Lakshmis. In each universe, there is a Lakshmi, but there is a Mahalakshmi, in a sense, an Adi Lakshmi that is primordial to those. We also say that Lakshmi is the primordial Devi. So
the origin of all Devis.
Right, that's it. All other forms of Devi stem from her. Yeah. So these are just some, again, I'm rushing through these points, but it's also just to make it clear, in case anybody had this question in their mind, here's a statement that clarifies it. And as we touched upon at the beginning of the episode today, this exalted position that they have, cosmologically almost, is reflected in our lived reality by the intensity of the Navaratri celebrations, the Shivaratri celebrations, and the genuine love and appreciation we have towards them.
Siddhanta should reflect your lived tradition.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's what this does.
The devotees of Bhakti Marga will read this and see that's an accurate reflection of our lived reality. They'll find themselves in that, right? Which is perfect. So, having tackled Vishnu Tattva, in the book, it's the Śrī Hari Prakarana, the section on Śrī Hari. We're now, and Shiva and Devi also, let's move into the Atma Prakarana. So we're going to tackle the Atma, okay? What is our particularity there? So, Sahadev, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure.
Defining the nature of the Atma.
Yeah. I mean, the Atma Tattva is generally very much in alignment, agreement with other Vaishnava Vedanta. Right? It's nothing new, because if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, which is of course scripture of Vedanta, Krishna speaks about the Atma in many, many verses. In chapter 2, also chapter 15. So Atma is eternal. Atma is, you cannot cut it, you cannot wet it, you cannot destroy it. Krishna says, Mama, Mamemsha
Jivaloke, chapter 15, verse 7,
right? So it's an eternal fragment of him, an internal amsha of his. So all these things are very, very much rooted in the Vedanta tradition, right? The Atma is consciousness, right? But it's also the possessor of consciousness. So we have Visheshana Jnana and a Visheshana Jnana, right? And this also addresses the issue of the Atma being a karta or bhokta, right? Which means is the question comes in Vedanta, is the jiva or is the Atma acting? Is it an enjoyer, right? Because if you enjoy something, then somehow there must be a transmutation, a transformation of a certain substance. So we address this by...
And you lose your purity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is
Immutability is destroyed,
immutability is a key principle that defines Atma Tattva, but it's that the Visheshana Jnana is always untouched, and the Visheshana Jnana is modified, through which the Atma is actually an experiencer. It's a karta.
Let's just clarify that for the audience to make it a little clearer. So you're saying that the Atma is consciousness and has consciousness.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? In a minute form, because God has it in completion. So what is not being touched is the foundational jnana that you are, but the one that you have as an attributive jnana is the one that is going through fluctuations based on interactions, experiences, and whatever else.
So
right?
a candle flame is the example, right? The candle is light, and it also gives light.
Yeah.
The Atma is consciousness, and it also has attributive consciousness.
Exactly. Yeah, the one is self-revealing, and the other consciousness reveals objects outside of itself.
So the Atma knows itself by itself.
Exactly.
Right.
But also through the Visheshana Jnana, it can know things outside of itself.
Right.
Right.
I wanted to just also bring in this point. When we asked Guruji, how would you refer to the Atma? Like we obviously posed this question to him, and he talked about his essence of Bhagavan, right? And this is something that is maybe not revolutionary, but it's very beautiful to somehow use this word, essence, and we call it Atma Shakti, right? So it is the very essence of Bhagavan. And so someone asked me this, they'd heard this in a lecture, I explained this, and they asked me, what can you give me an example? What does that actually look like? What does that mean? And I said, well, it both captures that which it is the essence of, and yet is different in some sense, right? It is a condensed version, very condensed version of that. And I said, take, for example, rose, and then you make essential rose oil, for example, from it. You almost squeeze the rose, and what comes out of it is its essence, right? And yet, in one sense, you'll look at that and say, that is the essence of rose, but you'll never look at that and say, that is a rose. It's not equivalent. The rose has both the form, the beauty, the shape, all the bhagas, and the oil inside of it, its essence, it's all there in the rose itself. Whereas the Atma Shakti, is only that extracted essence. It's a very condensed form that in a sense reflects it, but is not equal to it, right? And I think it's a nice way to conceive of it.
The Lord distilled to his essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, let's talk about that journey. Maybe Mayuran, you want to chime in here about the potentiality to manifestation, almost like the soul as a DNA. How would you present that?
So there is sometimes a big debate about the origin of the Atma, the origin of the Jeeva, and so on. Is the Atma in Prakriti from beginningless time? Prakriti is eternal. Was it ever with Bhagavan? The way Guruji describes it is that the Atma exists within the Lord. So the Atma is eternal. Yeah. Right, that's just a fact of the Tattva, of Atma Tattva. Yep. Right, it has no beginning, but it has existed. It has an origin with the Lord, right, and in potentiality form. We talked about the clay in the pot, gold in the ring. That the potness has the potential, exists in the clay in potentiality.
Yeah,
right.
Clay has potentiality for clay pot.
Right. So there is this cause and effect relationship, but it's not that the Atma is created. That's the key point to remember, right? So the Atma exists as potentiality within the Lord, and then through the Sankalpa of the Lord, it enters the Prakriti material world, and from that potentiality gets actualized. And through innumerable lives, whatever it is, 8.4 million species, however you want to put it, it goes through the Prakriti experience. And through this experience, through karmic activity, through bondage and so on, what happens is the rasa, the bhava, the relationship starts to open up. It starts like a flower blooming. It starts to open up, and it becomes more and more receptive to grace, to the blessings of the Lord, to the guidance of the Lord, to reaching a climatic point, let's say, of meeting the Guru, who is none other than the very grace of the Lord personified, and then coming back to the Supreme Lord himself. So that's a very quick overview. Yeah.
Let me unpack some points out of that, because I think it's important. So in a sense, when we say we're going to go to Vaikuntha, to God, we are going back to God, but not in the way we were before. So we've never been with God in the sense of full consciousness, relational, all of this. We were with him in an unmanifest, unconscious state almost. And the way that's explained, that's why I brought up DNA, is that in a sense, we as a DNA strand, you understand the entire, let's say, composition of the being, the potentiality of the being, and it goes just from an unmanifest to manifest state. So these are the two states in which the Jiva finds itself in, the Atma, unmanifest and manifest in a sense. But the uniqueness, the identity of it is eternal. It's not manufactured or created at a particular point. That's what we say. The blueprint for what the Jiva will be, in a sense, is already established in the unmanifest state, right? And this is eternal. Analogy that Guruji used, or an analogy that Guruji approved, rather, I can't remember exactly how it came about, was that as the beginning of this journey, the 8.4 million lives, etc., look at the Atma as being a block of wood, right? And then it's put into this world, and life, the choices of that being, the interactions, whatever happens, starts to carve that wood. And by the time we'll be done with our spiritual journey and we realize God and attain God, that block of wood will have been carved into a flute. But because everyone's life is unique, everyone's journey is unique, the flute that comes out at the end is unique. There's no other flute like it. Although we are all compositionally, as a Jeeva Tattva, as a Tattva made of the same block of wood, we're all in a sense blocks of wood, the flute that comes out at the other end of the process is unique. And so each of us plays a unique melody, because the carvings, the holes, the positionings, all of this, we will each play a unique melody in Vaikuntha.
And that is intrinsic to the Atma.
Intrinsic to the Atma.
Yeah.
Intrinsic to the Atma. And the beauty of it all is that these unique flutes, when surrendered to God in this Tadatmya Anubhava, in this Sharanagati state, the melody that they play with God's melody, it's harmonious, right? Because you could play a bunch of different sounds, all these unique flutes, it will make a musical mess. But because they're all submitted to the orchestrator, the guy who's leading the symphony in a sense, it plays beautiful, harmonious music, right? Because there is one will guiding all of these.
And Guruji so often stresses the uniqueness of every single person's relationship. Again, no hierarchy, right? No hierarchy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's now compare the composition or the state in which the Atma finds itself in. What I mean by that is, Jiva Goswami in his Sandarbha speaks about the nature of the soul as well. Is it always relational with God? Does it have knowledge of God? Does it have bhakti inherently? These kind of things, because there again, I think we have a different position. And so do you want to map that out a little bit?
Sure. So when we characterize the Atma as Sat Chit Ananda, when we speak of Ananda, often Ananda is portrayed as the goal of spiritual life, right? Because we're all looking for happiness, but that real happiness we're all looking for, you can term as Ananda. If it's a relational, we speak of prema, this pure divine love. But when we look at the composition of the Atma, this Ananda is an inherent part of the Swarupa of the Atma. But Ananda here doesn't just mean an absence of suffering or a potentiality for bliss, but it is actually a positive entity. It is actually a positive bliss. Again, if we compare it to the bliss of the Lord, it's minute, but yet there is a positive bliss, right? And I think where our Atma Tattva is perhaps most unique in relation to other Vaishnava Vedanta is this distinction or this two-entity scenario between Atma and Jiva. And this is very much related with that Chit component, or let's say the Atma's jnana, so that the Atma's knowledge. And Guruji very much presents a philosophy in which there is this two-entity scenario where the Atma is always in knowledge of its relationship with the Lord. But the Jiva, as the whole conglomerate of the Atma plus the Antahkarana, which is deluded by Maya.
Just to explain Antahkarana.
Antahkarana, you could say the mind, or let's say the manas, chitta, buddhi, ahankara.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is actually what is deluded, but the Atma itself is always pure and always in knowledge. So it is not that the Atma misidentifies, right? But there is, in a sense, an emergence of a new
entity.
Entity.
Yeah.
So the Atma empowers the Antahkarana, because let's just say mind, because I mean, it's a simple English word for Antahkarana. Yeah. So the Atma empowers the mind through the Visheshana Jnana, the attributive consciousness, just like the sun empowers and enlivens this whole world, but the sun itself is untouched by the goings on in this earth and this planet. In the same way, the Atma empowers the physical body and the mind and all the faculties itself, but it itself remains pure and untouched. Mm-hmm. And would you agree that in traditional Vaishnava philosophy, the Atma is misidentified?
Yeah.
It actually believes and becomes deluded in some way into thinking it is this body, this personality.
Yeah. So there's basically two scenarios. One is a scenario in which I don't know who I am, but another scenario is that in which I think myself to be someone else. Right? Just when someone is playing a video game and they're so immersed in it that they actually somehow start to identify it with the character because there's so much in the game.
Yeah.
Or if you're watching a movie, you begin to identify so strongly with the main character, for instance. So this is actually presented in generally in Vaishnava, in Vaishnava Vedanta, how the Atma itself is deluded, is misidentified.
Yeah.
So our take is a little different, right? So Guruji used a beautiful analogy of a cyclone. So he said the cyclone is in a sense the imprisonment of the Atma. So the Atma is the center point of the cyclone. And if you know cyclones, it's all chaos, it's all going around. But in the middle, nothing's going on in a sense, it's tranquility. So the Atma is untouched, undiluted, full of knowledge, and is essentially nityadas, but inherently nityadas, so relational with God, longing for God, because the Atma, as a result of having full knowledge, as a result of being inherently nityadas, does not require to be told about the existence of God, does not require to be told about its relationship with God, constitutional position, devotion, all of that. It has it naturally and is therefore expressing it. But it is imprisoned by this cyclone of Maya around it. It's almost in the prison of Maya, in the prison of the Antahkarana, the mind-body complex, the ahamkar. And so the ahamkar, as the leader of this imprisoned entity, guiding it, and it's stuck in prison almost behind it, right, is the one that we call deluded. So this Antahkarana-led being, this ahamkar-led being, is the one making all the bad decisions.
So the Atma is merely associated with, let's say, you're associated with drug dealers, but you're pure bhakta.
Something along those lines, right? It forms almost like an organic one, almost like Ramanuja would say, right?
Yeah.
That the Atma is stuck with this deluded being in a sense, and the two of them form a sort of a one, a unity. You can speak of it as being one semantically, but actually there's two entities in contention with one another in a sense.
Yeah. And this has massive implications, actually, in our spiritual life and how we think about our spiritual path. Like, Guruji's almost at times in his writings, and he does it in a very poetic way, but it's still, like I said, it has principles of Tattva in there. The Atma Tattva is still being revealed. He speaks about the Atma as being in full knowledge, as always longing to be at the feet of Narayana. So we talked about the Atma being in potentiality, and it's always existing, never created, but being in potentiality. And as he actualizes, I asked Guruji once, when it left the Lord, when the Atma left the Lord, at what point does it start longing for the Lord? He says, from the moment it left the Lord.
Yeah.
Right? So we say the Atma has this nature of the Sheshatva, this dependency, and Lord has this ownership over the Atma. And then we have this concept of this Svabhavika Anurakti, this kind of very nature of the Atma is to long for the Lord. So that the Atma is in full knowledge of the Lord. And we see that so often, like just small anecdotal examples, like and you see it with Guruji. There was a guy who he was into football all the time, right? And then his sister managed to convince him to come for a darshan. And then Guruji basically called him over after the darshan and started speaking to him. And he was like, he actually said to Guruji, I mean, I'm sure there's many other people who'd rather spend time with you than me, right?
Yeah.
And then Guruji simply said to him, you may not want to spend time with me, but your soul wants to spend time here, right? And this constant, I've heard him say that the soul is calling for me to initiate that person as a devotee, right? That and sometimes in satsangs he said when you landed in this birth, and he puts it like this in a very kind of comical way, the Atma sends an SMS to the Guru right? WhatsApp messages, ding, 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 notifications, right? And he speaks in these terms, and yes, comical ways, sometimes very poetic, but he's constantly speaking of the Atma that is longing, that is in full knowledge, that wants to come back to the Lord, which tells us, if you analyze your own life, you start to realize, my mind is telling me these things, but there's something propelling me forward in life. So there's almost a conspiracy between the Lord and your Atma through the Prakriti, and your mind, your Antahkarana, is all this turbulence and doubt and so on and desires. But there is a complete understanding between your nature, your Atma, and the Lord himself. And that's the beautiful thing that Guruji speaks about all the time.
I agree. I want to read actually something that from Guruji that sort of makes this distinction crystal clear, right? Speaks about that longing that you were talking about. So Guruji says, the greatest sorrow of the Atma is when the Jiva runs away because of the storm it is facing. The Atma knows that the storm is just another way to experience the Satguru's lotus feet walking closer and closer to itself. The Atma is truly happy because it knows that the storm one is facing is a great gift that is the mark of the Lord's arrival. The Jiva needs to awaken to the longing of the Atma. That last sentence especially. So this Jiva, meaning this embodied, sort of imprisoned conglomerate, like this one thing, right? This organic unity needs to awaken to the state of being that the one imprisoned entity actually has naturally, right? Okay. And this is where Pratyabhigna becomes a possibility. Yeah. Because we have this distinction of the two.
Just explain Pratyabhigna.
Yeah, Pratyabhigna, we touched upon it in the second episode. It's essentially this recognition from a deeper level, not mental, not emotional. It's not from the mind-body complex. It's not my eyes have seen and I recognize. It's what often characterizes any devotee's affiliation with their guru, with their sampradaya, with Bhagavan. It's not just exclusive to Bhakti Marga.
It's not deja vu.
No.
Is that the thing as well?
No, good point. No, it's something that we're actually introducing as a universal point, because often when it comes down to it, you speak to Gaudiyas, to Sri Vaishnavas, to whatever, and you say, why did you pick your path? They won't offer you necessarily a rational, logical argument. They'll say, there was something inside of me that awakened when I came in contact with this that was so authentic, beyond my explanation. I knew I found a place that I belonged. It's a sense of belonging. It's all of this. We are literally saying that is the Atma piercing through. It is the Atma's knowledge. It's not like I think it knows that is good for you.
It's asserting itself.
Bhagavan is there, and it asserts itself through the mind-body complex, and you feel it, and you feel that it comes from a space deeper inside of you. And
we have countless examples of devotees, like countless examples of devotees going, as soon as I saw Guruji, I was like, this is the thing. This is it. And I can speak in my case when I was talking about in the lecture before I was in complete denial. I was going through so much trauma inside myself because I overwhelmingly, let's say, knew Guruji was my guru. This was my path. This is the climax of what I've been waiting for my entire life. But my mind was constantly telling me, how on earth can you know this guy? How on earth do you know that he's even divine or he's even your guru or anything like that? So constant tension between the rationality, the logic, the cynicism, the skepticism versus an overwhelming sense of tsunami of feeling, of knowledge coming from deep from the core of who I am. And that eventually we can guess what won, all right? Hence, but I had to override my mind and realize that, as Pascal says, like the mind doesn't understand the reasons of the heart. Right?
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we mean by Pratyabhigna and the knowledge of the Atma.
And you feel that sense of the two entities inside of you so clearly in those moments. I had that as well when I first met Guruji in the first few months. I remember there was one darshan I went to in Switzerland, and I cried for 2.5 hours straight, just sitting there crying.
Yeah. And you're not that kind of crying.
No. And I remember in my mind thinking, what an idiot. You look like an idiot. Yeah. Can you just stop? This is ridiculous. You don't even know why you're crying. But I could not stop it. Something from inside of me compelling me. And it wasn't tears of depression. It was tears of like joy mixed with relief, mixed with, So,
it's a relief in a sense that you're breathing fresh air for the first time in your life because you're actually with the transcendent home. There's
a part of you that is happy. As Guruji says in his quote, it was, the Atma is happy about the oncoming storm because it knows what it actually is. It's God coming to me. I'm so happy. Yeah. But you're going, whoa, get me out of here.
Yeah, even he talks about things like, say you commit an aparad in some way, right, in your path or whatever to the Lord in some way. He says, it's not that the Lord curses you or the Guru curses you. Your Atma itself curses you. right? Because your Atma is lamenting. I have come 8.4 million species. I've traveled for so many innumerable lives through the Prakriti. Man, I've finally come to the feet of Śrī Hari, worshipping. I've been initiated, and then I've done this unbelievably dumb thing. Shame on you.
You know, I got an example of that because I remember when he was saying that, and I was like, imagine you're sitting in a taxi and you ask the taxi driver to take you home from the airport. You know where your home is, but you're sitting in the back seat. He's the one on the driver's wheel, and then he's going to the place where you need to turn right to go home, and he turns left.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oi, what are you doing? You got to turn right. Yeah. And he's like, no, I know better. And he just starts going left, and he takes you far away.
Another hour to your journey.
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah. Okay, I want to make one final point before we move away from the Atma Tattva. I wanted to touch upon Atma Anubhava, self-realization. I think we don't have the time for it, unfortunately. I think we can leave it for another time. It's here. You'll be able to read it all eventually. Yeah. But I wanted to make a point, which I think is, again, practical. In Jiva Goswami's conception of the Atma, because it is naturally devoid of knowledge of God and relationship with God and bhakti, and it therefore needs to be acquired from outside through sadhu sangha or whatever it may be, it does create a version of reality and of the Atma that's far more fallen, far more pitiable in a sense. It's not as glorious in a sense, right? And I think the reason I'm stressing it is because you see it in the behavioral culture, right? Much more humble, much more contrite almost, much more this. Rather, sometimes Bhakti Marga people and Guruji's devotees can seem a little boisterous, a little bit loud, whooping up the kirtan, just like very laissez-faire, a little bit like relaxed. And I want to qualify that, and I want to...
Also just ungrounded, right?
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, it is true. But I want to qualify that there is a theological premise for this also. It's because in a sense, our conception of self is not that we messed up. Like we out of stupidity came down here because we're stupid and devoid of knowledge, or because we are somehow lacking any love for God inside of us. No, it's all in there, and we have the conviction that it's in there. And in a sense, I have to keep my feet on the ground and just collaborate with the doctor that's going to perform the surgery and remove that Antahkarana from me, to transform that Antahkarana. And so it's almost like be calm about it and start to enjoy this Parabrahman everywhere. God love inside of me. It's much more elevating all the time.
In general, the Tādātmya Vedānta, it's a very life-affirming philosophy, versus retracting from society and going into a cave and whatever, pitying oneself.
Yeah.
It's a very joyful philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, look what Guruji's doing. Obviously, Śrī Hari is elevated supreme truth, encompassing many aspects of realization, the Hari Bhaktas from different walks of traditions and so on, bringing them in through things like, as we discussed, Brahman Realization and so on. Bhū Vaikunta, this world is not just a world of misery and it's not just temporary. It's not just a prison. It is actually the abode of the Lord. It is actually a place where Leela can happen with the Lord. So Prakriti is a sacred place where the Atma blossoms like a flower, and the true rasa and relationship you have with the Lord is actually manifested through this Prakriti, and the Atma is always in full knowledge, always longing for the Lord, always dependent, and you start to realize this whole nature of life is a massive cosmic Leela that is unfolding, and that's where the Tādātmya Vedānta is edging and nudging us to look at in that way, in that very elevated perspective. At the same time, if you listen to the Guru Vakya, Guruji is very tough. He's very grounded. He completely talks about the nature of effort, the nature of the stupidity of the mind, all of these things. So he does balance it and temper that very elevated philosophy with the practicality and the grounded approach to the spiritual path.
He's very blunt about that.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with him 4 days ago
that
went exactly down that road. Like, he was demonstrably being a little irritated by me for a while, right? And I just basically wrote to him and I was like, I've noticed this. Is there something that we should talk about? Because obviously I don't want it to persist. And yeah, he said, good that you noticed. It took a while, right? Basically, like I've been showing you the signs for a little while now. But okay, let's, not live in the past. So I acknowledged it. I said, let's talk about it. And he said, and he listed some criticisms and some issues that he had spotted in my behavior. And he said, and then he caveated it by making a very clear sentence afterwards. But this has nothing to do with you. I just don't like, and he paraphrased it, but essentially, I don't like that Antahkarana when it springs up like that, your ego identity and all this, right? So, but don't get it twisted. I love and like you very much. right?
Yeah.
But I know exactly who he means by you in that moment. It's
Yeah.
that double entity scenario where he's like, that one behind, big fan of that one.
Yeah.
This one in front, I sometimes like it, sometimes don't. Because even though you were doing much better before, like it was fine, but it's been springing up lately. So just want to call that out, right? That's constantly
One
going
quick
on.
experience with Guruji. One time I was in the lift with Guruji. We're traveling maybe in India, in Banki Bihari, in Vrindavan. And he was wearing this very expensive diamond ring that someone had given. It's a swan ring. It's amazing, massive, yeah? And it was very expensive, right? And he just went to one of the temples in Vrindavan. He got called behind for a special darshan by the pujari. He came out, he wasn't wearing the ring. And I was like, afterwards, I said to Guruji, where is that ring? It was so beautiful. Where is it? He just goes, oh, I gave it to the temple, just donate it. I was like, wow, okay. It's a very expensive ring, right? I won't go into figures, whatever, but but it was very expensive. And he said, I'm not attached to anything. I'm not attached to these jewelry. I'm not attached to this money. I'm not attached to these temples. And I'm not attached to this organization. I'm not attached to anything. And I started naming people. Are you attached to this person? They said, no, I'm not attached to this devotee or that devotee. I'm attached to nothing. Then I said to Guruji, are you attached to the Atma? And he said, oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'm attached to the Atma. Yeah. And this is where you start to realize that behind this whole Prakriti covering, that Leela is unfolding. He is here for the Atma. The Lord is here for the Atma. And the Satguru is here for the Atma, the calling of the Atma.
Fully agree. Okay, I think we've got about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes to discuss Satguru Tattva. Right. So I want to unpack this. I think it's important. We've got to do it. It's I think, where the devotees will find themselves most, in a sense, where I think it's also a topic that I find rests a little closer to my heart, in my opinion, because it's something that I feel like of all the tattvas, we can talk about Vishnu Tattva, Jeeva Tattva. There are different opinions in the Vaishnava landscape, but the different variations are not really problematic in a sense. Like they're just different perspectives that lead to different moods and behaviors. This one I find problematic in the sense that when this one is distorted or when this one is taken to a certain direction, it starts to cause real harm to the Vaishnava movement or to bhakti or to people's lives and spirituality, in my opinion. I want to unpack that. Do you want to maybe start by just talking about what is some of the conceptions that are out there, in a sense, that can hint at this problem that I'm pointing out?
Well, why don't you bring up the traditional stance of Guru and Vaishnavism as you understand it?
I mean, actually, the concept of the Guru tends to actually be quite elevated, right?
I'd say very much, yeah.
Very elevated.
In Vaishnava
in the Vaishnava tradition. But the question is how much that philosophical truth, that philosophical principle is actually lived out.
How it translates to reality.
And actually believed in with full faith, right? And because, the Guru Tattva as a Tattva, as let's say a principle, which somehow manifests in human beings or, in this physical reality is very, very elevated, right? How the Guru is the manifestation of the Lord's mercy, which happens to actually be also our default position of the Guru, of the Sadguru, right? But again, the question is there, how much do people really believe in their own Guru Tattva, which their own acharyas were giving?
To answer your question, like just point by point, traditional Vaishnava landscape is the Guru is essentially as good as God. This is what Śāstra says, right? Many acharyas, when commenting on this, reiterate this. Yes, Guru is as good as God. Not God, but as good as God. Representative, manifestation of the Lord's grace. Pure devotee. But most importantly, said Guru is also meant to be a Tattvadarshana. He can give this truth to others. He imparts Krishna onto others. And not just informational, realization. Because Krishna, when speaking in chapter 4, it's not that he can tell you about the truth. That's not the value of Guru, that he can tell you about the truth, is that he can give you the truth.
Yeah, and then we outline different avatāras here. So one avatāra would be someone who can clarify śāstra, right? A scholar, right?
Yes.
Can expertly go through Gita, Upanishad, Brahma Sutras and clarify to the disciple. That's just knowledge, that's speaking, language. Then you have another kind of avatāra who by their very behavior is exemplary, and so they inspire you, right? Because they're just so dedicated, so disciplined, and just the way they conduct themselves, you feel like you want to follow them. And then you have another avatāra, which is where we would really class what the avatāra really is one who has had the Tattva Darshana, who knows Śrī Hari intimately, and who can give Śrī Hari. I mean, Narada Muni correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the breakdowns of it is Narayana Da, like he can give Narayana,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So Narada Muni is one who gives Narayana, so he's a true guru in that sense. And so I think in our Siddhanta, the guru is one, the Satguru is one, who had not only had Tattva Darshana, but he, by mere sankalpa, by mere will, can bestow that on anyone who he sees as fit. And he embodies the very grace, the anugraha shakti of the Lord. That's how we see it, right?
Yeah, and I'll go into that as well, but you're absolutely right. So your point was, how much does that translate to people's actual faith and reality? And I think here's the problem with that. When you say that, I'll read a verse from the Bhagavatam first, and then I'll go into this topic. So in Canto 7, chapter 15, verse 26, the Bhagavatam says, "For the one who regards the Guru, who directly imparts the light of knowledge and is the Supreme Lord himself," says Sakshat Bhagavan, "as a mere mortal, all their learning is like the cleansing of an elephant, which is undone as soon as the elephant bathes and then covers itself in mud again." So one who regards the Guru as a mere mortal, all their learning is undone. Okay. You see, here, no arguments. It's very much elevating the position. The Lord himself, right? If you see him as a mere mortal, basically Jeeva Tattva, or everything is undone, all your spiritual progress.
Yeah.
Here's the tension that I feel consistently across the board. There are countless human beings, millions, billions, and as they hear about this philosophy, they say, okay, we need Guru. Guru is ascribed as a necessity for Vaishnavas pretty much universally, right? And they go, okay, therefore there needs to be, in a sense, an abundance of gurus because there's an abundance of devotees.
Yeah.
And so demand creates supply.
Yeah, yeah.
The problem there is that what if supply is not ready? What if production is slow? Because there isn't someone of that level, and you can't manufacture someone of that level, right? And what has happened historically is there are ways to mitigate that. So you create this other kind of apta, which is just someone who, and I don't mean this offensively, regurgitates truth. So be it śāstra, be it purvacharyas, be it whatever, and that's parampara. And when done properly, there's absolute merit and value to that, right? So for example, you take someone like Ramanujacharya and we say, let's say he is the one like Narada, it's the one who gives Narayana, right? So if you're a disciple of him and you repeat what he said, this is an absolute worthy, let's say, endeavor. You are giving truth of a realized person to the next one and the next one, unbroken chain, right? I get that. But no one should ever be under any illusions that there's a difference between this person and the one that's just repeating the words of this person. Because if you think there's an equivalence, then you're reducing this apta to speaker of words. When we said it's not just speaker of words, it's transmitter of Narayana. You give God, and God is not just given through information.
So I think there seems to be a mismatch, and I like what you said. Demand is outstripping supply, and I think that is the root cause of this mismatch. There is a tremendous beauty in saying I'm taking initiation into this sampradaya, into this parampara, because of the great personalities who I've read about and their writings. They strike a chord with me. They rise, even this pratibhijna, it comes up in me. And so I want to follow in the footsteps of these great personalities. And you meet a person who is a sannyas, who is part of this lineage. He may be a great person. He may be knowledgeable, exemplary in his behavior. And you think, you know what, I will take initiation from him. But what you're really doing is taking initiation from perhaps the other persons, the Purvacharyas, as you said, be it Ramanuja, be it Srila Prabhupada, or whoever it is, right? And you look to them as really the one who's going to give you Narayana. If you're honest about that, and that's what it is, you're basically having faith in the Shakti of the Parampara, right? And I think that's that honesty, and that's a beautiful thing to do. I think it's a genuinely beautiful thing to do.
Agreed.
But what I sometimes see is the rhetoric is, you quote these verses from the Bhagavatam about the Guru being basically Sakshat, the Lord himself, almost, directly the Lord himself in some way, right? And then you attribute that elevated status to what we would class as, say, a person who is a mere mortal, but, exemplary, disciplined, and so on. But you give them that elevated status and you pretend almost, and you talk, and you build a whole story and narrative to make that person on the same level to justify the Shastric quotes, when really no one really believes that.
Do you know what? And this is where, again, I said that this topic was close to my heart, and it's on this exact topic. I know I speak now from real dumbfoundedness almost. It boggles my mind how someone who takes on that title within the Vaishnava tradition, knowing the literature, knowing the way that the devotees are in a sense called to see them, how they don't correct or they don't openly and humbly admit, I am a mere mortal. I'm occupying this position out of, in a sense, utility, necessity. I will help you insofar as I can, but please do not regard me as being this Sakshat Bhagavan. Because when you see how many gurus have fallen, right, broken vows and done mistakes and fallibility, the normality, the mundanity of so many of these people, you think to yourself, well, before they fell, did they think they were Sakshat Bhagavan?
Yeah.
And it's like in the heart of hearts, these people know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. And I find it so dishonest and so deceitful because, of course, on the one hand, if you admit, you take on this position of a parampara guru, right, that you're passing on the chain, which I, again, validate, but you take on that position and you say, nothing. Meaning, if you want to regard me as Sakshat Bhagavan, that's okay, right? Knowing despite in your mind, I'm taking the case where the person knows that they're not. I know I'm not the manifest grace of Śrī Hari because I have all sorts of weird stuff going on in here, and I have this fallibility and all sorts of this stuff, right? So you don't say anything about it. Error one. The second thing is the ego, the ahamkar of these individuals may be an obstacle because you say, well, if I admit that I'm a mere mortal, but I also give validation to Bhagavatam that there are gurus that are not mere mortals, I'm in a sense putting myself in a lower category, right? I'm in a sense admitting that my role is what it is, take it or leave it, but there are gurus better than me. Yeah? I'm just doing what I can with what I've got available to me. No one wants to do that because it's not a very alluring option. It's not a very, let's say tempting scenario.
Well, there are people who do that. What happens is, as you said, demand is outstripping supply. So either you pick certain parts in the supply chain and elevate them to a disproportionate level, which is unrealistic, or you find loopholes in the real definition of the guru and say, actually, Guru, Sakshat, Bhagavan, that's it. But you look at this verse, it also means this and this. So really, Guru is just anyone who speaks Krishna Katha.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So you've really lowered the bar.
So we'll say, yes, Guru is someone who speaks Krishna Katha at a very low level, but we're not talking about that one as the Satguru.
In Vaishnava tradition, we're talking about something else.
Yes, and that's why our Tattva is called Satguru Tattva, because we're trying to say that kind of guru can exist. One who speaks, is exemplary, etc. But Supreme, the Lord Himself, Anugraha Shakti Avatar. Yeah, this is a very different position. We're talking about a very different kind of being. And so what I start to resent is that you start to hear things like, when you start to push for the divinity of the guru, when you start to push for the guru's like very exalted position, infallible, etc., they'll say, this is all a bit, too much. You're making it weird. This is all too much. And for me, there's a real issue there. It hurts my heart. It's not like, I want to criticize. No, it hurts because I'm like, you're contributing to the destruction of a very real category, albeit a scarce category. Just because it's scarce, don't pretend it doesn't exist, because that's how reality goes into myth and it goes into forgetfulness that it even existed in the first place.
Yeah.
You take something so beautiful and rare, but because it's rare, you can't show it to everyone all the time. And so then you say, maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe we should just take this cheap imitation and say that that's what it is instead.
Yeah.
So it becomes a redefinition in a sense of the Guru Tattva.
Yeah.
And it's just like, diamonds are very rare, but they exist.
Yeah.
But suppose I take a glass marble and I shape it in the same shape, same look as a diamond.
Yeah.
It looks the same.
Yeah.
So, but if I sell that as a diamond,
yeah, exactly.
Is that the right thing to do?
So you're devaluing, to bring it back to economics, you're devaluing the commodity effectively because the demand is outstripping supply.
To fulfill the supply.
So you want to meet the demand, so you basically devalue the nature of guru and still somehow bring up all these verses about the elevation of the guru, and then still at the same time trying to caveat it by saying anyone can be a guru because, if you just read the Bhagavatam and speak the Bhagavatam then, or Bhagavad Gita, then you are guru. And I think this is very dangerous. I think this is very dangerous to the tradition of Vaishnavism. I understand why it's happening, right? I understand because, like I said, we need gurus, and guru is essential for initiation. We want parampara to continue. We want the Vaishnava tradition to continue. But I think
you need different categories of guru.
Either different categories of guru, perhaps upfront honesty. I don't know. But do you know what I really think we should all do? Just cry.
Yeah.
Cry for Krishna. Who's it? Guru Govind.
Guru Govind Maharaj. Yeah.
Fantastic satsang he gave.
Disciple of Prabhupada, yeah.
Disciple of Prabhupada. Fantastic. He said to a person, you should cry for Krishna, cry for Guru. And this person said, my heart is like stone. My heart is like stone. He said, your heart is like stone. He said, then you should cry to Maya Devi. Cry that she beats you. Cry that she beats you so much. And then you have the tears for Krishna.
Yeah.
When we cry for Krishna, then that true Guru, right? That Satguru, the one who has had the Tattva Darshana and can give the realization, that Narada, the one who can give Narayana, he will appear. I think we should put more onus on ourselves as seekers, as devotees.
When I had Muni Maharaj on the podcast, I asked him how was it, because he was a disciple of Guru Govind Maharaj originally, and I said, how was it? It was crying school. We were learning how to cry for God.
Wow. Yeah.
This is beautiful. I like it very much. Okay, so having said that about the sort of landscape and sort of, I think, a very, very strong opinions that we have on this that I think are necessary, because I'm just really aware of the time, I want to summarize our stances, okay? It goes like this. The Satguru Tattva has a normative position, and then it has exceptional positions. So the normative position of what a Satguru is, by constitution, is Anugraha Shakti avatar of the Lord, which means that he is the Anugraha, the grace of the Lord manifest. Okay, that is the normative position of the Satguru in our Siddhanta. So another way to refer to it is a Swamsha avatar. So it's a Amsha avatar of the Lord himself, his own attribute in that sense, right? Now, the Satguru may also exceptionally be a Shakti Avesh avatar, which means an empowered being. So someone who is not by default composed as Anugraha Shakti, it could be an Atma, a Jeeva, for example, that is blessed by the Lord, could be Shiva or Devi, that have been graced by the Lord to fulfill that role of Satguru. The role of Satguru is to give Narayana to the people by mere sankalpa, as we said, right? Is to give Narayana. That is the Guru's role, right? To give the Lord. And so in that sense, the Shakti Avesh avatar can happen. And then lastly is the Swarup avatar. So the Swarup avatar is when the Lord himself takes on incarnation and fulfills the role. Because the normative Satguru, the Anugraha Shakti avatar, is naturally able to be fulfilled by Bhagavan, as Bhagavan is the repository of all his Shaktis, including Anugraha Shakti, right? So Bhagavan is capable of fulfilling any role. Just as Chaitanya fulfills the role of a devotee, the Lord may fulfill the role of Guru. Yeah, so these are the three instances in our Siddhanta of how Guru can be experienced. So you have the normative, Anugraha Shakti avatar, which is its own tattva as a principle, category of being, and then you have the Shakti Avesh model, and then you have the Swarup avatar model. Both of those more exceptions to the normative situation, right? And it bleeds naturally into our opinion, our stance on Guruji, who is Paramahamsa Vishwananda to us in this Siddhanta. So it is a contentious topic, and I want to pull people to the podcast that you and I recorded, because we already dealt with this topic to quite an extent, and so no need to repeat those points. We do see him as Swarup avatar. We do see Guruji as the Lord enacting the Leela of Guru, just as Chaitanya was the Lord enacting the role of a devotee. We do see it that way. But I want to clarify a misconception and an accusation that is often leveled against Guruji, that he claims to be Bhagavan, that I am God is something that he utters, right? That is not true.
I mean, I've never, in 16, 17 years of listening to Guruji, ever heard him declare that.
Guruji does not claim he's Bhagavan.
Yeah.
Then you may say, but he tolerates that others claim it of him. True. He tolerates that we make these claims. But there are two ways to understand that or to contextualize that in a healthier way, I would say. First is that we as devotees have seen him as our Sakshat Bhagavan. We have elevated him to that position of he is the most important thing in my life. I am dependent in a sense through my Guru Bhakti that he will be the means by which all my life will be fulfilled. He is the guiding principle, the leading principle in my life. He will not deny that to the person. He will not condemn or reject that to the person, firstly. Second of all, let's now suppose that he is indeed Swarup avatar. Hypothetically, for those of you who don't believe, and obviously I respect your position, but for those of you who don't have that, let's conceptually consider that he in fact is. And let's say that some of us devotees have had undeniable experiences with him that point towards that fact. Experiences that are beyond anything you could imagine, transcendent to the nth degree, right? It would be a disservice to humanity to the Sangha and to any aspiring Vaishnava for us to not say those things, to rob people of those testimonies, of those experiences, and then the freedom that allows them to choose whether to believe it or not. So I have no problem when any of you choose not to believe in that. There's no compulsion here.
To be honest, it would be somehow easier for the mission or the tradition that we're proposing if we didn't.
Absolutely.
It would be so much more palatable for people.
I would receive infinitely less criticism. We all would.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
But this isn't the point. I would be doing a disservice to myself in that moment. I'd be a hypocrite because I'm denying my own experiences. And this is something that I believe needs to be contextualized. Guruji allows us to make those claims. He does not get up here and say, I am God and I compel you to believe that and to behave as if that is the case.
Yeah. Oh my God, you referred to me just as Sadguru. You don't know that I'm beyond?
Yeah.
No,
This is not the case.
This kind of stuff never. But the onus is on us to just be grounded and to understand, as we talked about now at that previous episode, that Samarvata Swarupa, that this true nature of Guruji we don't understand it, right? I mean, we're putting terminology on it, Sanskrit terms, and so therefore we feel good about ourselves, but we don't understand it, really.
But our conception of the Sadguru, and specifically Guruji fulfilling that role of the Sadguru, ultimately it's also very much reflected, or let's say rooted in our philosophy with the Pratyabhijna. Right?
Yes.
And the Pratyabhijna is also rooted in general in the Atma Tattva. That the Atma has
it's all internally
a knowledge.
coherent. Yeah.
It's coherent, yes.
Yeah.
The Atma actually has a knowledge and it can have this recognition.
Yeah.
Right? And so the whole thing, just to get back on to give a bigger picture overview, I think it's very, very coherent for devotees. And it's beautiful how it really roots one's own experiences in philosophy.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. This is one of the things that this does. It grounds the claim in not only like logical grounded argumentation, but philosophically sound and coherent argumentation. I think we can leave it there. I think, look, watch the podcast that we did already. We already speak about some of the reasons why we would believe such a thing and how we deal with it, and some criticisms towards our own devotees as well and how they handle that topic. I do think that people need to take a step back and reflect on competing claims of divinity. As I said in I think the first episode on the Sampradayas, these claims are made everywhere. Everyone, and even when it's not about Bhagavan, it's about something else. The Sri Vaishnavas think Ramanuja is Adishesh. Yeah? The Gaudiya Chaitanya is Radha Krishna, and all his associates are corresponding divinities. The Swami Narayan is Bhagavan, and all his successors are also very exalted beings or expansions. This happens across the board. Now, I'm not saying that they're all true or all false, but we have to definitely be a little bit more mindful of the fact that across borders, looking from the outside within, just as I know how often we appear ridiculous to people on the outside because they haven't had the experiences that we have had, the same thing is true in the reverse, right? And so I think that taking into account everything we said about the diamond and the crystal analogy and these kind of things, there has to be a little more caution, and I think just consideration to these claims. In general.
And I think just to conclude from my side, these 3 episodes, we have been looking to establish Tādātmya Vedānta, Guruji's Siddhanta, and being philosophical. Yes, we've done comparative analysis and at times being critical, potentially, here and there of different points, because there are points of contradiction, of opposition, and so on. But look, all of us, let's get real here. We just want to attain the feet of Śrī Hari. We just want to surrender. We just want to love God. We just want to love our Guru and serve more and more and more. Ultimately speaking, because this series was about philosophy, we brought up these things in a very strong, prominent way. But do you care? Do I care? Does Sahadev care? When we meet another Vaishnava, do I care what tilak they're wearing? Do I care about what their Jeeva Tattva is, or how they say, is Krishna like this or Ram like this? I don't care. I don't think Guruji cares at all. What we care about is, can we work together as brothers and sisters, God brothers and sisters, to serve the Lord and advance further and further closer to his feet?
That's all. Elevate each other.
That's all we're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think that's a perfect sign-off. Thanks very much for the conversation. This concludes our 3-part series. As I said, once the book comes out, if there's anything that you heard in these 3 episodes that you want to sort of understand a bit better, it's going to be unpacked more inside the book. So really, if you feel like we didn't flesh anything out enough because of time restrictions, obviously you cannot cover an entire book in 2 hours, even if we did it 3 times, 6 hours. So I still think, pick this up. This will be, as I said, publicly available in a few months' time. Obviously, when it comes out, I'll make an announcement on my channel as well, so that all my viewers can know that the book is now available. Follow the Bhakti Marga channels, follow Paramahamsa Vishwananda's channels, and of course that will be an easier way to find out when it's available as well. So I look forward to this book arriving in the hands of people that have had these questions and have had these challenges, so that they can understand the philosophical and theological framework behind all of this, that it is absolutely rooted in not only the words of Paramahamsa Vishwananda, but also in Śāstra, and that you can understand Guruji's depth. Let's put it like that. So, Jai Gurudev, thanks very much, guys.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev, thanks so much.